5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Dangerzone. I'm sitting down with the boys from Dead Reckoning Collective. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So, for the audience, let's just kind of cover what is Dead Reckoning Collective and how you guys got started.
So I've always liked to start talking about Dead Reckoning with the name first. Obviously, if you're in the military, you should kind of at least know you've heard of it, but land-nav term to describe the process of finding yourself on a map based off a previously known location. So in short, our philosophy is always to know where you are from where you've been. And so when we started, we just wanted to highlight veteran transition, the success stories, and kind of break the stigma and change the narrative of all veterans are just broken, or we have this sign of proceed with caution. And so Keith and Ryan actually kind of started it with the kind of blog site with just a space where you can kind of create long form conversations, blogs, articles, whatever. And then I actually wrote an article kind of describing the process of coming back from being hurt downrange early. Mm-hmm. And we released that, and it did really, really well. And then we've realized we kind of want to become more of a publishing company, focus on kind of veteran creatives and kind of showing that, yes, you were a veteran, you were somebody in your past, you performed a specific job, and those skills that you've learned through that job, you can now translate and use them in your civilian life.
It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I definitely, I'm a big fan of that, I guess I would say, mindset, sort of being able to like change people's view of the veteran, I guess, life journey, or the military life journey. Like, there's a lot of ruts I think people get trapped in, whether even if they're not a veteran, like their thoughts about veterans or the veterans themselves, kind of getting stuck in these ruts that just lead to, I think, some unhealthy lives, but
well, and that's kind of what we wanted to do, is bridge that gap, not only for the veterans themselves to kind of figure out who they are, and like our process in itself of us figuring out who we were once we got out was, okay, yeah, we are civilians now in some sense. Yeah, we're veterans, but we have to assimilate to this culture at the same time of helping them understand our culture. And we're the minority at this point, and so we have to educate them in some sense, but kind of abide by the rules and kind of norms of what are governed around us, whatever states you live in, and whatever atmosphere you kind of operate in. But what's nice is we saw kind of this image and kind of, I don't want to say stigma because it has a negative connotation, kind of all around all veterans being more kind of that right-wing, gun-bearing, angry.
Yep.
And we used to have kind of the term bro vet, and it was just kind of more of a joke, but like there are guys out there who struggled with what they did, but aren't necessarily broken. It's just they're trying to process it. And so like you are thinkers, you have emotions, you're trying to process all that, and you want to share them, yet there was kind of this it was almost like frowned upon in a way, in some sense, of talking openly, freely, and honestly about those emotions. And Keith and I felt it was important to share those so the people who don't understand can, and the people who do understand can feel comfortable sharing theirs as well.
Yeah, and so it's Veterans Day weekend, and you guys put together an event, poetry reading. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
So we've been moving towards the idea of creating a physical event. We do everything online, and we really haven't put our faces on very much. And even this event isn't about Tyler or I or Ryan, but we wanted to do something to bring people together in person. So we knew an event was in order. when we were deciding where it was. I'm up north and Tyler's in Texas, but there's a high concentration of veterans in Texas, so we figured if it was going to be successful anywhere for our first run, we would try to do it somewhere in Texas. So Armadillo Ale Works in Denton, Texas is the people that were kind enough to host us and donate the space. And we have about a dozen veterans reading poetry and prose, different narrative type things. And then Paul Handelman, who's a former Ranger, is going to be playing music in the evening. So it'll be really, really good. It's come together really well. We've had a lot of donations from our friends' companies, Softly, Recon Rings, Snake Farm,
American Yogi, Task Dev,
Aries Clothing.
We just picked up Black Rifle Coffee Company.
Yeah.
The support's been tremendous.
That's awesome. So y'all played a hand in putting out some poetry books, right?
Yeah, we
Have
did.
you guys put out a poetry book yourselves, which is the Fact and Memory?
Yeah. So Tyler and I co-authored Fact and Memory.
Okay.
We decided that we wanted to start putting out books and helping other guys put out books.
Mm-hmm.
And so in doing that, we wanted to put out our own first, so that if we did screw it up, it was our own work, and we weren't, butchering somebody else's creativity and like what they poured their heart and soul into. So
And you're getting into publishing, so like, why not get your hands dirty?
exactly,
Right. Well, yeah, and so like Keith, he's always been a writer, and when I wrote that first article, I realized not only do I have somewhat of a knack for it, it was something I really, really enjoyed, and it was just a very great space for me to really process things. I haven't been a writer. I've always been somebody who, I guess, thinks a lot about everything, and writing provided that space for me to outline my thoughts. And I realized I was a very scattered brain. I didn't know how to necessarily process everything, so it gave me just a really good time and space to just put a lot of thought into one little thing and organize it all. And like I said, we put out that poetry book, and also referenced something a little bit earlier, is with Dead Reckoning, we've never wanted to be the face of Dead Reckoning, Keith and I. And so the collective mindset is what we've always wanted to focus on. And so when we put out Fact and Memory, nobody even really heard of Keith or myself associated with Dead Reckoning until that moment, really. Other than the people who really knew what Dead Reckoning was. And then when we put out In Love and War, that was just even more so with Leo kind of spearheading all that. He saw what we put out and the time that we really made it something worthwhile. He's like, hey, can y'all do this for us? And we were immediately like, yeah. And so all proceeds went to Gallant Few. The business hasn't made any money on it. Keith and I haven't made any money on it.
Yeah.
And the idea was for 36, 38 other veterans to feel that sense of accomplishment, to see something in physical form, and be able to share with their friends and family.
And I'm one of those veterans.
And you are, and you're going to be out there tomorrow.
And it feels really good. What you guys did behind that, like, you achieved your goal as far as I'm concerned. Like, at least I can only share from my experience. But I didn't even sort of realize that I was writing poetry. I kind of like stumbled into it.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how this sort of new rise of this sort of generation of veteran artists and poets are kind of, I think, in a rising as far as
It's a movement for sure.
Awareness.
Yeah,
is probably the best way to put it. But so I had actually met David Rose, a veteran author, and podcast. I've done a podcast with him, and then separately I met Leo in Colorado, and after talking with them, they had told me about this book that was coming out, and they said, hey, if you write some poetry, you should submit and see if, gets in. And so I was like, well, I think I've written a couple poems or whatever, maybe. Let me go see. And I go look. Turns out I've been writing a bunch of poems.
Yeah.
Didn't even realize it. And it was just like you were talking about earlier, it had been a way that I guess I had started processing a lot of these things, a lot of the stuff I'd been through, just kind of doing a lot of introspective writing where I'm just kind of trying to find out the answers to the question of like, who am I now compared to who I was in the past? It is like what you're talking about. It's like, figuring out where you came from, to figure out where you're going. It's kind of getting that like reverse azimuth, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's been really beneficial for me. And I guess I didn't realize how much it was. It just keeps on sort of unveiling itself over time. How good poetry is for me, and just writing and creating in general. But for you guys to put out the book, it was like now I could see it in something. I don't know. It helped. It did kind of just help elevate things, right?
Yeah.
And it gave me a just broadened my voice, because that's. I feel a little bit of a calling, like to sort of share my voice on things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I started a podcast, and so, yeah, the more people that I can get to kind of maybe see things differently or see things in a different light, the better.
And absolutely, just to add on to that, is it gave you that sense of affirmation in some sense, and that sense of accomplishment. And that's what Keith and I felt after we put out Fact and Memory was Dead Reckoning was doing fairly well when we decided, like, hey, we want to do this. And that movement had already started with David, with Leo, with Justin Egan, and they had already started their Verses and Curses tour back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd been writing poetry since 18, but never felt comfortable with it. Keith had been writing it for a while, and we kind of started realizing, like, that there is a calling for it, and it's kind of becoming cool again and more acceptable. And I wasn't the type of person to kind of, like, lead that charge, but now that space is open, it's like, yeah, we need to take advantage of this, because it is important, and to show guys that it's fun, it's cool, it's a great way to just figure out who you are. And then, like I said, Fact and Memory, it did way better than we thought. It was a poetry book.
Yeah.
And Dead Reckoning was still growing, and nobody knew who we were, and we sold a lot of copies, and we were like,
Yeah.
this doesn't make sense.
And a lot of it was friends and family, but
Yeah.
a lot were not. Like a
Yeah.
lot were. We had a lot of sales because we sold everything. We tried to kind of cheat the system
Yeah.
and order a ton of author copies from Amazon, who we printed it through, and sell them through the website so that we could sign them and package them ourselves.
Oh,
And
yeah,
people really like that, right? But a lot of the sales that came through our Spotify, we were looking at the names and addresses, and we didn't know who they were. So we had already built like a pretty solid community, or at least attracted people from the community.
It was international, like within the first week or two. Like
Yeah.
England, Australia, Ireland, I think like Taiwan,
But
Japan.
I think that was what
It's crazy.
we got from that too, is the confidence building side of it.
Right.
Because we not only, did the trial by error thing, and we didn't have too many errors, we had, more success in publishing it, putting it together, the aesthetics of it and everything, but it was the confidence building. So we finished a finished piece of writing.
Right.
And what was cool about that was we kind of realized that we could help other people do that. We could help other guys and girls like who had never published anything, show them that, yeah, it's kind of like a live fire drill, right? So before you're actually putting rounds down range, when you can do it in a training environment, and rather than just blanks and, bang, bang, gotcha, like you can see that, okay, I did what I'm supposed to do, and this is the positive result that we ended up with. So when we look at Fact and Memory, that was our learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew that when Leo had kind of mentioned In Love and War to us, that we were confident enough that we could do everyone's work justice. Like, and we didn't take the responsibility lightly at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
There's a lot of long nights. Yeah.
yeah. We didn't want to fail with that one, but we knew what we had learned with any kind of hiccups from Fact and Memory that we could fix with this one, and we put a lot of time and effort into it. But the work was done by all the writers.
Yeah. And how many writers were in
36, 38.
Yeah.
That's a lot to put together.
Yeah.
Like to put it together in a cohesive piece like you guys did. And so my hat's off to you for that. Like, I can definitely see the work you put into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think other people see it too. I brought I was involved with this veteran hunting event, and we brought out the guys. They knew my poetry the people who put it on, they knew my poetry is in there, and they wanted to kind of support, what things that I'm a part of too. And so they decided to buy copies for the sponsors of the event and have me present it to them at the event. And it went really well. And it's a weekend event, so it's not just like one day. They just get handed it and they go home with it.
Yeah.
And people just like opened it up immediately and started pouring through it. And just would come up to me later and be like, this is so awesome. Like it was immediate feedback, Like sometimes you create something you like don't know how people are going to receive it, but it was just like immediate, like positive feedback from that book.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what was really cool. Is like I said, we're going all back to Fact and Memory. It's like we felt it pretty quick, but within Love and War, we saw how well it did so quick, and and it may sound whatever, but I'll give ourselves kudos. Like we went #1 new release within the first week it was released. On Amazon, and then like within its category, and it was #3 within the bestseller charts in its category. The only people that were ahead of it was Dr. Seuss and Shel Silverstein. So like it shows you that
competition.
yeah, exactly. Like it shows you how well it did, and like you said, that immediate feedback. Anytime somebody reads it, like you could tell, like everybody poured their heart out into it. Every single piece spoke to somebody differently, and like Leo, like I said, is his brainchild and everything, but I was the second person to read everything, and I read all 220 pages or 190 pages, whatever it is, like in one night. Yeah. And I'm at work, and I'm like having to step away. I was like, this is incredible. Like, I don't think I couldn't process what I had in my hands of like so many people just put everything they had into this. We really, I hope people understand how serious we took it, and yeah, it was pretty rewarding.
And the feedback was from civilians. It wasn't even like other veterans or anything like that.
It was from everyone.
Yeah.
It was from people from all different walks of life. I mean, we had like Gold Star mothers reaching out, saying, this helps me gives me perspective on, what my son went through. We had, just military parents saying, my son has trouble talking to me about his experiences. Maybe not even because it's emotional. It's just sometimes it's hard to articulate to someone who doesn't have the same experience, or you just feel like you're not supposed to. And then we had feedback from service members from all different career paths saying, this is really great, or, I can't relate to this, but I recommended it to this guy and he really appreciated it. And the feedback was incredibly humbling.
Yeah. It reminds me, you had kind of mentioned this before, but something that I really appreciate about it is when we can bridge those sort of civilian veteran gaps that people perceive, because it really isn't. Like you said, we're civilians now, right? We are also veterans, right? Mm-hmm. And I think I was when I was in the military, I was under the mindset of like the people who write books about stuff are like basically
pansies are sensitive.
Like why would you write a book about like what we do out here, right? There's a lot of sort of those mentalities in the military, right? The guys who write books about stuff are basically like the posers, or or whatever,
or they're trying to toot their own horn or something.
Exactly. But when I transitioned out and got in, became a civilian, I started to realize that, and that my whole perspective on war, military service, everything was like had shifted in a way, and I started to realize it's important for civilians to know what went on during the war.
Yeah.
And who better to hear those stories from than the people who actually did the work? Not, I mean,
a major.
I'm sure for historical purposes, a general's book about what happens might be good. Might. But because they can see things from a very high level and talk about, things kind of shifting and everything. But if you want to know, the on-the-ground truth of what's been happening in these wars that we as a country sign up for, the best way to do that is to hear from the people who are actually fighting them. And so I went from a person who was like against veterans writing books to I'm working on a book. And I think it's important. I think it's important to share your life experience, right? It's how us as humans we hopefully progress and become better as a nation, as a human society, as we learn from other people's experience, right?
Yep.
Well, one of the best compliments I got within the books, and it almost kind of was like a backhanded compliment without the guy understanding it, but like I later kind of sat on it. I'm like, well, that works is, you asked earlier, and I kind of said it's like, I'm a firefighter, full-time job, and being up here in the North Texas area, it's very conservative, kind of white male-dominated kind of arena, but they don't talk about their feelings as much other than with the guys on their crew and everything. But he read Fact and Memory and Love and War, this 45-year-old man, and he has a daughter that's, I think, 18, 19 years old, who has like a divorce. They come from a divorced family now and stuff. And one of our poems in the book, I don't even know if it was mine or someone, I can't remember what the poem exactly was, but he's like, this helped me understand what she was going through. It was his daughter that's had a divorced parental relationship.
Yep.
And I was like, that's kind of like, at first I was like, so a poem that some 30-year-old man wrote related you to your 18-year-old daughter, but I was like, that's exactly what we're trying to do, you know? Like, it shows the similarities between a girl who's struggling with whatever is the same as a 30-year-old man who's seen combat.
Yeah.
There's parallels.
Yep.
Trauma's trauma, loss is loss, love is love. It ended up being probably one of the best compliments I got from all of it.
Yeah.
It was a pretty cool thing just for me to kind of like really sit on that thought, because at first I was kind of like, I don't really know how to take that.
Yeah.
But it was pretty cool.
And I think that's a point too. Like, I mean, Fact and Memory, at least, In Love and War was very military centric. In one way or another. But Fact and Memory, like Tyler and I threw a lot of stuff in there that was not. But it's still, you know, it all rounds out, and people can relate to one thing or another or whatever. But you know, we put a lot of work, both of us, into it, and we have very different writing styles, and that was the cool part too, is that people could recognize that, you know.
Yeah.
If you pick up the book, we just put our initials at the bottom of each poem. We didn't separate them or anything like that. A lot of thought went into the placement and the sequential order of each of them. But yeah,
something my older brother says. He's a veteran as well. He's a Army officer, West Point grad, and he got wounded in Afghanistan, burned really bad. And so I went through my own struggles, like trying to compare my getting wounded like to his getting wounded, right? There is no comparison.
Well, there is, but
it's
hard,
yeah, and it's just different. But he does some public speaking. One of his public speaking events, he put it really well, is everybody goes through adversity, and it's a way that, yeah, you may be writing about your experience in war, experience in the military, experience transition, experiencing getting wounded and stuff like that, but it does cross multiple lines of the human experience, and that's one that I think is really important, is the adversity one. Is if we can find ways to deal with adversity in sort of a positive way, right, a constructive way, something that's going to maybe improve your life or the lives of those around you, then, you know, that's good, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yep.
But so let's see. We got Veterans Day.
Veterans Day.
We came in. You guys, we just met.
Yep.
And we went to. You had found a art gallery that was putting on a special deal for Veterans Day.
Yeah, so a buddy of mine in the fire service, and this was cool about for my transition. I've had a relatively easy transition, being a medic in the Army, now being a paramedic firefighter. Like, my transition probably is as smooth as it possibly can, and it still has its issues because you're still constantly trying to compare. Similar to you comparing injuries, I'm comparing camaraderie between the fire service and the military. You know, so it's so easy just to just do those pointless comparisons. But one of my good buddies in the fire service, he's really into photography, so he follows a gallery here in the Dallas area, and I'm terrible with names. I think you guys remember their guy's name, but it's the PNCB gallery, and the gallery is called Where Have All the Flowers Gone? And it was a Vietnam veteran who had created it all.
Burt Finger was the main.
Burt Finger, yeah. So he was I think the Vietnam vet. He did some photography, and then he also compiled a bunch of other photojournalists for the Vietnam War, and then we saw Croatian War.
He's the husband of the curator too.
Yep, the curator, and my buddy just sent me a link on Instagram. It's like, hey, I think Dead Reckoning will be interested in this, and he knows a little bit about Dead Reckoning. And as soon as I saw, I was like, yes, we will. And it opened up last weekend, and it's going all the way through the first or second week of February. And yeah, that's where we all met, and I was taken back by it.
Absolutely.
What'd y'all think of the display?
I wasn't expecting it. I knew there'd be some weight and gravity to it, but I was not expecting it to impact me as much as it did. Like,
which part of it do you think?
So they had the Larry Burroughs, specifically a photo essay.
Can you
right?
talk closer to the mic? Sorry.
Absolutely. So there was a photo essay by Larry Burroughs in there, who's a famous photographer from the Vietnam era, and basically just that series showing that almost instantaneous, in a relative sense of time, coming of age, where that kid woke up loading up for that mission. A kid, he looked 18, 19 in the photo, and by the end of that day, like, that was a whole different human being, right? And I can absolutely relate to that very specific instance, to the day. Like, I can remember the day completely. So I was completely taken aback by that, just by that series. Yeah, like I absolutely, and I'm glad I looked at that. You guys went off on the other side of the room, and I started with that, and I absolutely welled up at the end of it, and continued moving on around the long way.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I was.
Describe it a little bit more, because it.
You want to run through like what it was?
Yeah, it's important, man.
Okay, absolutely.
At least that photo essay, because that's a good way to. I wish I started at that, but I think I did it halfway through.
Absolutely captured like the whole thing. I mean, I could read you the story of it if you want, but no. So the photo essay was ultimately just it was, and I'm sure that I'm not familiar with that man's body of work, mind you. I'm sure he's got far more, but from what we saw was just a. It's a young man. It starts off. He's a gunner. Looks like a crew chief on a helicopter.
Is that a King B? I believe the helicopter.
I took a picture of actually the forward, like the kind
where
of the
the pilots are sitting up above.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's like
the troop compartment area, and it has one door on one side.
Okay, so I saw the one door. I didn't know the pilot was above them.
Weirdly, they give the call sign of the aircraft, but they do not give the actual.
Yeah, Yankee
like
Papa.
The nomenclature. Yeah, it's Yankee Papa 3.
The SOG guys in Vietnam use those a lot.
Okay.
But and then the kid's just a crew chief on it, and Larry Burroughs gets on there. Obviously, the crew chief's going to be door gunning. Burroughs, the photographer, gets on there with him and has an incredible setup on the weapon. And it looks, in one of the photos, you can actually see the way he's mounted his camera on like a rail that just kind of sits off, and he tucks himself back out of kind of harm's way, and like can remotely control the camera, right? And just snaps all these photos of what's going on. And during the course of it, he ends up capturing just these incredible images of from what we saw today. This kid loading up, cheerful. It's just another day, nothing to write home about. And then in an instant, it went to shit.
Him medevacing, him being in a firefight.
Yeah, one of the birds gets shot down. They land. This kid's a crew chief. He's door gunning. Now all of a sudden he's pulling people out of the crashed aircraft, and then
The series of photos was crazy.
It was insane.
The order
just
of the photos.
It just tells the story perfect.
I'm not entirely sure that I'm doing it justice by describing it as poorly as I am, but basically it all culminates into everything said and done. Like, the kid did phenomenally. You don't see him showing anything but the appropriate emotion or intensity or whatever in the situation he's in, right? 'Cause you see his face throughout the whole thing, and he doesn't look panicked. He looks, okay, well, I'm loading stuff, no big deal. Okay, they're shooting at us. This is going to be an issue, and he's addressing it accordingly. He's getting the people out, appropriate face and reaction. And then at the end, you can see where like everything it all ran over.
It almost looked like
And
his world in that moment collapsed.
It was
'cause
a
he
whole new
collapsed.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's just completely collapsed over his Foot Locker, and that was a whole different human than the start of the day.
And you said you can remember like that, like a moment in your own life where
200%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's crazy about that is something as it was a poem or a picture. Mine wasn't like my instance. I'm thinking of wasn't in a helicopter at all, but I immediately can just be placed there.
Yep.
Just as media is that dad can compare his daughter. It's just again everybody can compare trauma, loss, love, war, like all of it, and so we're so much more similar than any of us want to ever give credit for. None of us are that unique or special.
Yeah.
But we all are so interesting and complex. It was cool.
And those were black and white photos. I don't know if we mentioned that.
I think
but, like,
everything was black and white,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And
there was some color.
The Croatian War
Was
was color.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
there was
Syrian
color.
War.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was going in
Yeah, the
expecting just Vietnam
Yeah.
photos, and I spent a lot of my childhood poring over books on Vietnam War, and just I think I was kind of raised as a child soldier. Like I always knew I was going to join the military, and I was studying warfare from a very young age, and even like reenacting ambushes in like the woods of Arkansas, like straight out of
Like out of the Ranger Handbook.
Yeah.
Just doing L shapes in the woods.
yeah, with the little walkie-talkies and everything.
Well,
But
obviously
it-
we were all children
Yeah.
of cinema and literature, because I think
Yeah.
I was like, when they started playing the soundtrack, I was like, "This is Platoon, right?" And you were
Yeah.
like,
Absolutely.
yeah.
There's no hesitation."
Well, they had pictures of kids playing war.
That's what I was getting into. Is that's really what kind of struck a chord with me, was seeing those kids playing war. Like just pictures of, I think some of them were like in the streets of New York or something,
Philadelphia.
and they have like
Harlem and
like an AT4 tube or something. Like
I think that was actually in Colombia too.
that
So
was
it's-
that was in
absolutely in
Colombia,
yeah, so
AT4.
it's international too.
Yeah.
Like it's
Wow.
in the human DNA for all of us to see this, witnesses, and
Yeah.
then reenact it.
But that's what really kind of struck an emotional chord with me. I was kind of like, it just immediately, just these photos transported me back to my childhood, and things. I think of it relatively often, just like the fact that I used to play war, but seeing those separate pictures of different kids in different scenarios brought back so many more memories, because I played war all the time,
Yep.
right? So that was kind of cool to experience that. But
It's funny because I come from a military family as well, and my dad, he's still in the military, but I remember him writing me letters when he was in the field, and I had no idea what it meant. And he would say, "Hey, I'm playing Army," because he was gone for those couple weeks or whatever. And I didn't really process it like that, but I was playing Army too whenever I was a little kid, and now I have 2 little boys, and one's almost 4. I don't think he's ever watched a war movie. And the other day I saw him building Legos the shape of a gun, and he's like, "Pow, pow," and I'm like, "What the heck is going on?" Like, it's just,
yeah,
it's in us. But he watches like superhero movies, so weapons, still, and violence and all that. It's just, we're all about that action, that adrenaline, and I don't know if it's a man thing or what, but man, it's in us.
I think it's a warrior thing.
Yeah.
I think as long as humans have been around, we've been fighting each other, and that's led to the development of warriors within, the human species.
And that's what's hard for me sometimes too, because I have the ideas like, well, the title kind of implies where all the flowers gone. It's like the beauty, like that war destroys, is kind of at least my interpretation of that title. But it's like, so I kind of associate war as something ugly and bad at times because of my experience. But man, it's so awesome. Like to just see that intensity. I remember the first time I saw an A-10 drop bombs.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying is like it fuels that warrior in us or something. And I talked to Keith about it. It's like there's still times I want to get back in, and I want to do that. And I'm like, I know the both extremes that this could offer me.
Yeah.
Why am I wired this way?
So just lately, I think I've kind of come to terms with that. I thought I had sort
So
of
help me out.
processed that kind of leads me into one of these questions that I want to ask you guys is like what the hardest thing you've ever done in your life is, which is a tough question.
That is
But
a tough question.
For me, it was like getting out of the military and like ending my career early. I was raised to like join the military. My father was in the military, and my older brother, me, and it's just I always knew that's what I was going to do, and I was going to stay in forever, right? I was going to be Master Chief Daniel Brown. I was going to, fix the Navy Special Operations Medic community,
Hell yeah, you were.
and yeah, but then I got wounded on my second deployment, and deployed again and got more deteriorated, and it just making the decision to go in a different direction than that was probably the hardest decision of my life. But what was I going to say with that?
About why you said that you just recently come to terms with
so that being said, like losing the military was sort of a big deal for me, and early on I thought I did a pretty decent job of sort of like putting it in a box, right, and saying like, hey, that was that chapter of my life, that's done now, like kind of what we were talking about before, like, hey, now it's time to do the next thing. And just sort of like I really try and work on my mindset, the way I view things, right? And so it's like, hey, this next chapter is going to be even better, right? That was just the beginning. I'm going to do more. I'm going to do so much better things now. But war is fucking awesome. Like being in combat is a really cool feeling. Like I haven't found anything that compares to it, but that's a specific feeling. Now, so over those years, even though I've been able to kind of put that in its box, right? There's times most of my friends are still in, and they're going on these awesome deployments, and killing terrorists and all this stuff. And yeah, I'm just like, dude, what am I doing, right? Like, I should be over there. Like, I'm a warrior, right? I should be fighting. And just lately, I think I've finally kind of turned the page on that, and it's realizing that I am still a warrior. Like that's who I am. It's a very much engraved part of me. I think we are sort of called to it, or just born into it, and just because I think there's comfort in knowing that the universe, I guess, requires you to be a warrior in that combat state for a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And it's longer for some people and it's shorter for others. And if it gets when your natural time as a warrior kind of dies off or transitions from that to something else, you're still the warrior. You're still in that role, but it's sort of like in a reserve role, right? It's subdued. So the universe doesn't require me to jump on a 240 and shoot, at bad guys right now and kill them. It just needs me to be prepared if the universe ever needs me as a warrior again, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why I can't let myself go. I don't give up. I don't hold on to that combat past. I have to start thinking, hey, I need to be prepared in case the universe needs me in that role again. And also thinking about how you can continue to be a warrior and sort of share your experience, right? Kind of going into that teacher role. And there's, I think some people get stuck in the mindset of thinking they have to teach exactly what they did, right? Like, I should go be a civilian contractor at the Special Operations Medic course or something, right? And I don't think you have to take it that literal. There's a way of doing it through poetry, through this stuff, like setting up the next era of warriors,
Yeah.
I think we benefited so much from what the Vietnam guys went through.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, like I was saying to, the curator at the gallery. I said, tell your husband we said welcome home. Like I was really bummed he wasn't in town to come to our event or just to be at the gallery to talk to you. But those guys got a raw deal.
Yeah,
very much. We got hugged in Dallas and Atlanta, and they got spit on. We got phone cards and like they got called baby killers. And I think a lot of people have lost sight of that. A lot of people have forgotten how good a lot of our transitions have been.
and as much shit as the VA gets, and some of it's rightfully so, but
Sure.
Man, the Vietnam vets have advocated for our generation of veterans, and I would say a lot of the beneficial treatment is outside of the VA. It's outside of military medicine through nonprofits, and a lot of those are supported by Vietnam vets.
Yep.
And other veterans.
Keith and I try to talk about that a lot. Is again the whole stigma mindset. The VA itself has a stigma, and a lot of it's negative.
Mm-hmm.
And like you just said, rightfully so for some people.
Mm-hmm.
I've had nothing but great experience with it.
Yeah.
The only time I didn't get paid was me screwing up something with paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
It was my fault for not filling it out, or an issue with my GI Bill was because I didn't finish the paperwork with it. And so it's like I had to own that. I was upset when that money didn't come in, and I was like, well, shit, I messed up. So it's like they do everything they can to support us. And the Vietnam Vets of America, is that what it is?
Yeah.
They've helped Keith out. They've helped the VA out. And again, it's an awareness thing. And so that's what this GWAT era can kind of do for the next generation, because
That's what we have to do.
It's going to happen again.
Yeah.
We talked about it with one of our last podcast guests, with Luke Ryan, is war's going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to.
Man, and if you look at like other countries' veterans care, it's just insane. Like in Canada, amputees have to go and verify that their whatever appendage they're missing hasn't grown back, like once a year.
That's insane.
There's no way.
So I
Yeah.
mean, if you want to bitch
A lot
that
of
like
medicine's
you
good.
lost 10%,
Mhm.
or you got
It's not gonna be
reduced
a lot.
for something, whatever. I like tit for tat. Like it's just there are some things, and again, like you said, the VA is extremely imperfect.
Yeah.
There's some really, really awful
It's
cases.
a
of
government
neglect.
bureaucracy.
It's
Yeah.
a government organization.
Yeah.
And once you get over that and understand that it's going to be inefficient, and also understand that it's a bogged down system.
Mm-hmm.
They have a ton of guys that they put through the war, so yes, they have a responsibility, but it's just like waiting in a busy line at the grocery store and getting pissed at the cashier. Don't
Yeah.
get pissed at the manager. Get pissed at the owner.
Yeah.
Like don't kill the messenger.
And don't give up. There's
No.
think
Be
outside
patient.
outside the box. If the VA's not working for you, look for other. There's tons of nonprofits out there.
Yeah.
Tons.
I know
that-
a lot of guys who are getting a good disability
Yeah.
check and bitching about not getting proper care from the VA, but you're still working a job, plus you're getting a check cut every month.
Mhm.
So like use that money wisely, like learn what works for you.
Yeah.
And then advocate that other that the VA research it for other veterans. Like Tyler and I were talking about, the idea that the VA hasn't started research on medicinal marijuana, which
Mhm.
is just crazy in
Yeah.
2019.
For reference, Keith's Canadian now, so it's normal for him.
That just
Yeah.
means I have more perspective because I've talked to tons of Canadian
Yeah. But
veterans. But yeah,
you make a good point. I've podcasted
Yeah.
with some Danish guys, and I've traveled over Denmark, and they I podcasted with Jacob Panton, and he heads up they sort of have like one nonprofit that takes care of their veterans. And granted, they're a smaller country with a smaller military,
yeah,
but they're actually one of our, like, I guess,
they get
really
down.
strong allies.
Yeah.
They love America.
Yeah.
There's, among other things, there's like a huge Harley riding community over there.
Yeah,
But we saved their ass in World War II.
Mhm.
We saved their ass, and they haven't forgotten it. Like most, I think there's just some kid advocating for us to like stop teaching about World War II
Oh yeah,
in schools because it's
Yeah.
too traumatizing. But
he's an Instagram influencer.
yeah.
yeah.
Pretty sure he was English. That doesn't count.
But what's cool is the Danish, they very much remember like what America did,
Mhm.
more so than I think some Americans. And it's something that was really cool over there is they have this statue of this soldier in Copenhagen, and he's holding a rifle in front of him, and he's got his head down, and it's a shame statue. It's basically saying that like they didn't stand up to the Germans, like when the Germans came in, and so it's actually a reminder of like, don't let this happen again. And granted, they had a very like strong resistance in Denmark and everything during the time. But the point is, I guess that I'm getting to is, their veterans, like they don't get welcomed home over there.
Yeah.
And they have kind of like an Israeli deal where there's a everybody serves, right? Like you go through basically a boot camp, but then you could go on to do whatever job you're going to do or whatever. And so I don't know the specifics, but it's very short time. So everybody kind of feels like they're in the military, even though they never did anything in it. And so there is this feeling of like, we don't have to thank you for your service or, you know, provide you the right kind of care and stuff like that. And that's why he's advocating for, you know, guys to get taken care of over there. And they actually fly guys over to do veteran like retreats, outdoor activities, like the DoD war games. They're heavily involved in that. Yeah. And some of those guys haven't felt like those feelings we have of like coming home until they were in America at like an American nonprofit put on event for veterans, where Americans are coming up to them and being like, thank you for your service and everything. And that's the first time they're like hearing that. They don't have it in their country, you know?
Yeah.
So we do have it very well. Like,
I wonder, because so Keith, Ryan, and myself were all stationed in Italy, so we have at least somewhat good perspective on European culture in some sense. Luckily, I traveled a whole bunch, so just that much more. But I wonder, especially with World War II, like the fight was there, and then when we were in Afghanistan, the fight was there. Like there hasn't been a fight here in America since the Civil War, maybe War of 1812.
Civil War preceded the War of 1812, so,
well,
succeeded. I should say.
Canadians love talking about the War of 1812.
But that's what I'm saying. Like that's pretty much our only
without saying like
of
Pearl Harbor,
okay,
like
but
you
then,
know,
like those are almost like terrorist individual attacks.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really a war.
But the war
here.
wasn't fought here. Yeah,
and that's what the Europeans did. So like, I think the civilian culture over there, like, they understand war itself a little bit better than our catered Americans.
I think they understand the effects of it more.
Yeah.
Like they understand the ramifications of it.
There's still
far
marks
more
in buildings. And,
right. Like you can, we were, like you said, we were all three stationed in Vicenza together. You can walk through the city square and these pillars that just sit there that people walk by all day long. There are bullet holes on them, like from World War II.
When I was in Ireland, same thing. Yeah.
Right. And to me, that's incredible. To them, they're just used to it, right? That's fair enough. But I think as a whole, those European countries understand the gravity of war far more, the ramifications of it, than we do perhaps over here in America, because we are far removed from it. I mean, to a degree, I mean, we always say we're going to take the fight to them, you know, better to fight them there than over here. Well, if that's the case, then I can't get mad at them because they don't have a perspective on it.
No. Well, no, again, that's it's always that, like, we fight for the unknowing, the unwilling, whatever, but it's like, that's what we called to do, and the tax dollars are sending us there.
It's what I volunteered to do.
Yeah, and it's what I volunteered, but what I'm wondering, too, with that World War II thing is, like, they have all that respect and appreciation, and same thing with World War I is they fought that war for a while before we were ever involved. And it is very ingrained in their culture, both, again, civilians and veterans. And so,
quick story about that. So my new neighbors across the street are I can't remember what country they're from, but they moved from one of the Eastern Bloc countries. Their family was from Poland, and my son's friend, his grandfather was like a guerrilla sniper.
Oh, okay.
So
in World War II?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he took off into the woods and just wreaked havoc. Like, and this kid has grown up with the story of how many people his grandfather slayed.
Wow.
From the woods.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm there talking about.
And he could go play in those woods.
Yeah, man. Like
in his backyard.
This is great. Like, Good. That's I mean, that's a cool thing to me. I mean, obviously, maybe wait a little bit before you start talking about like the gruesome side of warfare to your child, but like he has a legitimate hero to look up to because like his grandfather said, "Nah, I'm gonna go do this," and that's the story this kid's been told about his grandfather, but I think it's just, or his great grandfather, sorry, but yeah, no, I think Tyler raises a good point. I think the perspectives are so different in Europe than they are in America, and I think it's for that reason. And I think it's the same thing with the GWAT. Even though it's been televised, the country has been so sheltered from the war, and that's another. Circling back, that's one thing that Tyler and I have kind of talked about is that it's important for us to push guys to talk.
Yeah.
Whether it's creatively or just a narrative or whatever, but like just be open about it. This whole like I'm a closed book and you don't understand thing like isn't working and it's not helping anyone.
Yeah.
And being honest about it.
I'm
only cut the tail end of it.
I'm excited for you guys to hear the poems I'm going to read because they're not the ones that are in the book.
Good.
And
nice.
I'm really excited to do. This is going to be my first poetry reading.
To be honest, it's my first one.
Yeah. To do a live one.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm really excited. Like it's yeah, because I know some of the poems I'm going to be reading, and it's like covering some of these like things we've been talking about, and so it's just like I didn't know how they're going to be perceived, but I feel like at least 2 people or 3 people, might enjoy them, which is good.
Oh man,
but
so whenever we were setting up the event too, so in context with what Denton is it's revolved around 2 universities, TWU, Texas Women's, and UNT.
Where Tyler goes to Texas Women's.
I do go to Texas Women's, about to get my bachelor's degree finally. But they're both liberal arts schools. Well, one's liberal arts, one's more nursing. But that's what the whole community is built around, is creative kind of culture. And when we picked this venue to do the event at, she kind of, at the very end, she's like, "So you guys veteran business kind of thing?" I was like, "Yeah." And at the very end, she kind of like, "So I just kind of want to say this with being here in Denton, but you guys aren't very political, are you?" And I was like, no, not at all. Like we're apolitical." And I'm like, probably to be honest, we probably agree with both what people in Denton think, but also what most of Texas thinks. Like we're pretty middle. And she's like, "Okay, good." And it's like, that criticism is important, on both sides. And so I think it's important.
Did she think it was a rally?
Yeah, I don't know what she exactly thought it was until I explained it a little bit more, but and then I showed her like the Instagram and a little bit more stuff. But again, the stigma, another stigma. My wife, she worked at the psychologist's office for the longest time, and the main doctor is one of my best friend's mom, and so I knew her fairly well, and that's how my wife got the job. But after my wife was working there for a couple months, like all of the counselors, including her, would eventually be like, "Hey, well, so does Tyler have a PSD?" Right? And like they've maybe talked to me 2 or 3 times. I don't think I've ever given any indication, normal conversations, but immediate comparison, and I probably do. I don't know exactly, but it's just like, it's just I'm immediately associated with it.
Yeah, and I think that's a problem, right? Like,
it's like they don't know how to talk to me,
I'd like to get into like how, you said you've been writing for a while, I guess poetry, and you kind of got into it later, I guess.
Poetry for a while, but writing in general, like more thought out stuff, pretty recent.
And has it just been writing, or have you done other artistic endeavors?
I mean, we've both always done like graphic design types, so we both always drawn and stuff as well.
I do woodworking as well.
Yeah. Tyler does some really cool woodworking, but yeah, like I mean, anything visual, anything that we can create, I think is something we've both always done, but found useful in our transition as well.
Mm-hmm. So I would like to talk about that a little more, that kind of dive into it. But before I do, I'd like to say that, like, for veterans that are listening to this and kind of to civilians around this Veterans Day, is like, if you're a civilian, I would encourage you to move past the whole just thanking people for their service on special days. And if you meet a veteran or it's Veterans Day and you come across one, have a conversation with them.
Yeah.
They're
Yes.
just another human
Thank you.
being. Like, have a conversation with them and ask them about their experience. Ask them how they're doing now, how their
Yeah.
transition go out of the military. Like, what are they into? Is there,
That, you know what, that makes me think of, we were talking about They Shall Not Grow Old, that documentary.
Yeah.
If anybody that's listening hasn't seen the documentary about
Amazing.
World War I,
Do it.
incredible. It's about to hit theaters again. And what I thought was one of the coolest parts about that was they talk about the making of and how all of the commentary was taken from thousands of interviews that they did with guys returning, and it was archived and put in a storage room, and they revamped all that audio footage and used it to narrate the entire film. I don't think there was much
Gosh.
narration.
No, it
was
wasn't any
mostly
at all.
commentary, right?
No, it wasn't narration at all.
All commentary.
And oral history is so incredibly important for that, because it can be biased, but that bias is necessary. You're not going to get the same perspective from a history book with the facts that have been agreed upon by the powers that be that you are from someone who was there and has nothing to gain or lose from telling you their story.
Right.
No, absolutely. And Keith and I talked about this a little bit yesterday too. Is again, that bias is important. People right now in this culture, specifically America, and kind of how things are going, is it's becoming a little more sensitive, but it's in very more culture awareness and cognizance of like not really, I guess, just understanding other people and really breaking down those barriers and getting rid of prejudice in some sense. But the truth of the matter is, when war was going on, those prejudices were warranted for the most part, and like that's also the reason why we were doing it. And whether or not you agree or not with the reason doesn't dismiss the fact that that's what we were actually doing in reality, in this physical plane that we all operate in. That was what was going on. And so the people who experience it and they come back and it's completely uncensored, they may be a little bit skewed with emotions. And I have friends who, police officers, that they say eyewitnesses are the worst things for court because it can be broken apart. But dude, again, a poem or fiction isn't necessarily true, but it's true enough when truth isn't good enough, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what an eyewitness's account is. It gets to the soul of a story.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the facts or the truth. It gets to the soul of why we were actually doing that.
One of the introductory topics for one of my master's classes was bias. And we had to watch this presentation from a Somalian social worker. And she was talking about the importance of bias, the importance of recognizing bias, and the reason being that you have to take inventory of your biases. Otherwise, you're going to let it spill into everything. You can have your own biases, you can have your own beliefs, and you can think something as long as you can put it away so that you can still help people. And I think that's what a lot of veterans need to realize, and a lot of civilians as well.
Yeah, and that's why I would encourage civilians to do that, is like have a conversation. And also, don't be afraid of reading a book of poetry from war. Even just because some of it might be about war, there might be something there for you, right? Yeah. And then for the veteran side is, I would say don't let things get in the way of you sharing your experience in that way, right? Be approachable to the point where somebody can talk to you. A civilian can talk to you about your experience, and you can share it and explore new ways of doing that, because it's not the same for everybody. And that's what I want to start getting into, is like, what are some of the things that you do to help you process yourself, and then have found that it's also a way you can share it with others, and they can kind of have some understanding. And you're talking about woodworking and writing and doing graphic design and stuff like that. So like, what are some of those things, and like what specifically about them? Is there like therapeutic aspects to it that you found, or, is it just kind of like a process?
So the first thing I'll say is you got to also, same thing with, I guess, taking inventory of these biases. You got to also take inventory of like, are you trying to distract yourself?
Yeah.
Or are you actually being productive? And that's one of the biggest issues that I'm kind of going through right now within my creative process, work, and a bunch of other endeavors is, am I doing stuff just to distract me and do something, and I don't have the follow through or the end commitment kind of thing? Or am I doing this to have an end state result with a goal associated with it and to actually contribute? And that's important. So I'll think a little bit more about what I do constructive, but I wanted to preface with that because that's what I'm currently going through.
I think what's important to realize about, like, I mean, you know, we can narrow it down to like poetry specifically, but like it's not a new thing. You know, you look at like the Oxford poetry, war poetry anthologies, and it goes all the way back to the Civil War, all the way back to the Revolutionary War. It's always been a thing. It's always been a channel for warriors. But for some reason, people think that in a negative connotation, poetry is taken on like a feminine side, and it wasn't always that way. It wasn't. I don't think. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Years and years ago,
I don't think it ever was.
women were discouraged from reading and writing. So it's. I don't understand how that stigma started.
The Vikings, it was like you had to be a poet to be like a man.
Yeah,
it was like to be a strong, well-known man, you had to be able to stand up and give poetry at dinners. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how religious people are, but the Bible in itself,
yeah,
you know, like it's just, that's what poetry again is. It connects so many ideas so quickly, so seamlessly. It's subjective and it's interpretive, and that's what's important. Is it's not about, it doesn't get bogged down by truths and facts. Whatever we want to do, it gets to the root of emotion, and that's subjective, but it's still real. It's still part of what we're all experiencing, and it's real to each person in a variety of ways. And so one of the best things about it is kind of that, especially in our culture right now, of like that immediate sense of gratification and short attention span. Poetry kind of, it's easier, you know. You can write a poem within just a couple minutes. It's like 2 or 3 of my best poems that got the best traction, and I like the best, I wrote in one sitting in just a couple minutes because I was able to pour out my heart, and bam, it was done.
It's different for everybody too, though. I mean, like, I know along with what you're saying, like Justin Egan, who wrote, I think he's on his 4th or 5th book now, Outside the Wire and a couple others. And he was a contributor
Art of
to
Warrior Poetry.
Yeah, that was his most
big one.
Or no, not his most recent.
No, most recent was
Sun Also Rises in Helmand.
Oh, I need to get that one.
Really, really cool, man.
Super cool.
All my
too.
deployments were to Helmand.
Oh, well, then you'll probably even like
You'll
it.
love it. He
did.
killed
That's
it.
one of my favorite ones.
He wrote a really short book. I can't remember how many poems it is,
I think
but
it's like 11 or 12.
It's a very
short,
thin
maybe
book,
20.
very short.
Very short.
But he put a lot into the artwork and the aesthetics and the concept of it. Really, really cool book. So
Shout out to
hope
Justin.
everybody is making a list and adding things to your Amazon cart. But
Yeah. Hey, for anybody listening to this, I'll include the links to like you guys' book, all the books we've mentioned. I'll go through and add those to the description, or the description on the YouTube video to this.
yeah. And if you guys run out of stuff from that, we actually have a reading list on our website under the recommendations section. Yeah.
But going back to your original question about, I guess, that creative space and making it productive and how it's benefited us is, so one, I've always been somebody who's operations always in my mind, I guess, within whatever. I've always been a thinker, and sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. But what any kind of creative outlet provides is one specific thing to put all your focus on. And so I'm a really hands-on learner, and so woodworking, it's very hands-on. Any kind of carpentry, any kind of remodeling that I've done in my house, it is very hands-on. I've always liked the math and sciences. I was a medic as well, and so breaking down numbers, measurements, doing some simple math in my head, it's all problem solving, and that's all what it is. It's either simple or complex problem solving and visualization of a before and an after, and how do I get to that point. And so it's a creative space, and again, within operating with my hands is woodworking, writing, drawing. I've never been very musically inclined, but try. It's like at the end of it all, you see the finished result. And that's what's always been important to me. Now, again, going back to, am I being distracted or am I being productive, is there has to be a finished result. And whether in leaving something better than you found it, and what do I want that finished result to be? And can I actually be proud of it? Or did I start cutting corners? Did I start cutting corners? Like, did I really put everything I have into this? Because we were talking about his brother earlier. It's like, did I stop before I really... Yeah, did I stop before I should have?
Yeah. Or, rushed a project.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
Or
did too much. I used to have the problem of adding too much.
Yeah.
I would not be able to see something as finished. And I think that's the big difference. It's a maturity thing, right? Like, now I can finish something and look at it and say, yeah, like that's done. But like I used to create, whether it was like painting or drawing or whatever, or writing, and I would just mess with it and mess with it and mess with it, and until it was ruined. Like, because I had tried to perfect it too much and just destroyed whatever good I had put on there in my initial sprawl. Like, I tried to put too much detail into it. I tried to change this. I tried to change that, and it would just destroy it. And I think that's, I don't know. I think a lot of times it's a first take for me nowadays. So.
Yeah, that's a very good point, though. I think there's a balance to it, right? Because I feel like I was kind of the first take type of person initially. Like, my wife's a really good artist, but I tend to sit down. I don't consider myself a good artist. She thinks my drawings are really good, but I like pen art, like just drawing something in pen because of the finality of it. There is no erasing. I mean, I guess you could get an eraser pen, but I don't. And so it is kind of that one take, right? You're just kind of one and done. And so when I got into writing poetry, I would just kind of write stuff out, and I had the tendency to be like kind of holding on to that. Hey, I don't want to doctor this thing. I don't want to edit. Like, I just want it to be raw and like what it is or whatever. But I allowed myself to like see things differently. And a good friend of ours, a girl named Jamie, she was a friend of my wife's and my friend, and she's a civilian. She's moved over to Scotland to get her PhD. And it's a really cool program, actually. It's all about like the history of walking and outdoors and stuff. But she's really good at writing, right? She's really good at it, and she volunteered to help edit for me for my poetry.
Cool.
And it's been this awesome process, the editing process, right? Which I wasn't for, right? I was like, hey, I want to keep things raw and edgy or whatever, but through this process of like sending her my work and like getting feedback, and then I'm changing it. It's not her changing it. It's just like getting some of that feedback, I think, is where I found kind of balance within that, right? And then I do feel like I hit an end state, right? Where, okay, this thing's done. Like, it's been through this editing process, and then now I can say, hey, it's done. And it took me a while to find that.
There's multiple times recently that Keith and I have talked about how fortunate we are for us, because we're two creatives that can be open and honest with each other. And the fact of memory, it's the easiest point of reference that we have right now. But like, it was so fun for me to write something, send it to him, and him be like, "That's perfect, dude. It's freaking awesome."
It's usually because I didn't read it and I just want to make him happy.
or he'd be like, "It's almost there." And so then I had to kind of be a little bit more critical and be like, what is it missing? Or he'd just like, yeah, man, cool. And I just could tell, all right, I know what that means. or he would just be straight up, depending, I guess, what mood he's in. I don't know. But it is a process. You can't, I used to kind of want to be the same way, but my first take isn't usually very good. You have to take the time to layer it down and find detail, you know.
I like what you're talking about, though, with working with your hands. Like, I've found that to be really therapeutic, especially for living life with a brain injury.
So I have TBI as well. So
Yeah, and it's, I think, I've found several things along those lines that you've been talking about that have been beneficial for me, and it was things that, you know, weren't just like readily apparent, I guess, when I started down the journey of trying to heal myself. Right, it's not the stuff that's available in military medicine or VA. It's I found working in the garage on my Jeeps, like you said, that using your hands, turning a wrench, and like building something where it's kind of simple in what it is, but it's so therapeutic. And there's this, when you have a brain injury, a lot of times people struggle with attention and focus, right? And so I was struggling with that, and so like sitting there trying to read something on a computer or on a phone, you know, it's just like the brain just drifts like really quickly. And so doing something like that where you have this tactile input and output is like an exercise in focus and attention. It's something that can hold your attention and focus for a period of time. So it's almost like exercising the brain in that. And then doing new things like sailing. So I was in the Navy, but I was a corpsman, right, with the Marines. So I never went on a ship, ever. And so I figured I needed to earn my sailor card when I got out.
That's fair.
So I started sailing, and turns out sailing is very much that way. There's always something you can do to the sails, to like the sail trim, to make you be riding the wind perfectly. And so you're constantly like having inputs and outputs, and, you know, using your hands in that tactile function. And so that's one of the other things I've found. And it's doing something new, which is creating new neural pathways, which is also really important for traumatic brain injuries.
Yeah.
And that's where, man, I totally get it. And I kind of want to ask a question at the end of all this, but we've created kind of a culture in some sense where we want to shut things off. We want to be distracted, watching TV, on our phones. Oh man, I'm so exhausted. I just want to veg out or whatever. I want to binge watch. I want to binge, whatever the case may be. But for people who need that stimulus still, or it does just wither away, or I feel like almost like rotting. I can't focus when I'm doing that. It spirals. It's just not constructive, or it's just not good, productive. But that's not how we were also wired as humans.
Yeah.
We're here to absorb our environment and then react to it, you know? And so, like, I've always really been into fitness before everything, and then even since, and it's because that mind to muscle connection, the proprioception, knowing where you operate within space and time, it is incredibly important. And so having hobbies, and it doesn't even necessarily be creative art ways like woodworking or writing or painting or anything, but again, like just remodeling something, like all the thought process has been done for you. All you got to do is kind of read and watch videos to learn the skill, and then you just perform the task. It's already been done for you, the learning process, and now you're just kind of completing it. So like labor jobs, man, like I cut trees before I joined the fire service. I loved it because I would sit there and just look at a tree and say, how high do I need to bring this up? Is this going to look better if I cut this? Like, it's just soaking in your environment and reacting to it, you know? And the question I wanted to end up asking was, when you're saying you're going on this journey of health kind of by yourself, because the VA wasn't able to offer you that, are you really doing it by yourself, or what kind of help have you actually gotten from it?
Well,
outside.
I guess when I say like myself, I'm more referring to doing the introspection necessary to like be in tune with myself.
Okay.
And kind of following my gut feeling or my intuition. And so that's what's really led to me to find things that have helped. And so I have been very fortunate in that a lot of people have helped me along the way. But finding those people was myself and my intuition, if that makes sense.
Do you have a hard time asking for the help, or is it just kind of organic when it actually happens? Like they just kind of appear in your life when you feel like they're necessary, or
it was hard until I shifted to making my mission getting better. I realized that not asking for help kind of got me where I was at, right? Like being the medic on the team, I didn't want what I was supposed to treat myself, basically, and I didn't. I was the worst patient. I was the worst patient possible,
Yes.
which is why I continued to get blast exposure after blast exposure after blast exposure over and over again. And according to the protocol, I should have been back in the United States a long time ago. And so, but I also know guys who weren't medics that the same thing happens, right? They don't want to leave, right? Nobody wants to leave when you're doing the most cool thing you could ever
It's like
do.
a really
You're
fun birthday party.
Yeah, yeah, right. And yeah, so I was really bad about asking for help until, like I said, that was the hardest decision of my life. Was basically that, is like realizing I had to say, hey, I need help, like I or else, you know, I feel like I came to a point where my life could go kind of two different directions. And
It probably would have.
and so when I started asking for help, the more I did it, the easier it got. But for me, the thing that's still hard is feeling like I'm taking a handout. Like I feel very, I have a really strong work ethic. I like to work hard, and so feeling like I'm receiving stuff for free or receiving a handout, it kind of that's the hard part for me. And I've actually, you know, I've never shared this before, but like a lot of the programs I go through, I end up donating money back to, because like I feel like I have to pay for what I'm receiving. And I don't know that I'll ever get over that feeling, but it's I don't think it's necessary for everybody to feel that way, right? And it's probably not you know, I shouldn't feel that way. I should just be able to receive things and like be thankful for it, right? Be grateful. But and I am, and a lot of people have helped me along the way. It's I've benefited greatly from the benevolence of Americans, like because we take care of our veterans. And so that's one of the reasons I moved to Texas, is there are several brain centers in the Dallas area. I went through the Cerebrum Centers program, helped a ton with my balance. Before I would go out in nature and be walking like on a trail where there's a difference in planes, and so there's like, let's say there's a steep cliff to my left, you know, going up, and then, you know, steep cliff going to the right. It would trip out my vestibular system, and I would be dizzy and like almost falling off the hillside. And so from somebody that I've never been afraid of heights, like jumping out of planes, I was never afraid to jump out of a plane. Like it's just, you know, I might be missing a wires loose or something in that area. But all of a sudden I'm like hugging the wall on these trails. I like can't, because I have to like brace myself. And after going through their program, my balance is like super on point through the vestibular retraining they did.
Wow, that's right.
And that's enabled me to get back outdoors. Like I was basically coming to the point like, what, I can't go on nature trails anymore. You know, this is like very helpful for me, and I can't do it. Like what? So I found them, you know, through the network. You hear from somebody else, they tell you about it, but it does take some initiative. It does take you reaching out to those programs. I think a lot of veterans think the help's coming to them. Like there's an ambulance coming to your house,
Or they don't want it.
Yeah.
You know, or they're avoiding it like you were.
Or it becomes their identity.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more the former than the latter.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more of veterans, and this may just be me being cynical, right? I have no way to back this up, and again, probably just being cynical. But I think a lot of it is veterans are so accustomed to, and this I'm speaking in terms of my generation of veterans, right? the GWAT portion of it. But I think they are so used to that, either that help coming to them or being told to go to that help, or you know what I mean? Like they're waiting for that answer to be given to them versus
or guided to it, yeah.
right, rather than looking for it. I mean, ultimately, first aren't coming to tell you that your MedPros is red and you need to get your life sorted out. Like, but that's not happening right now. I think it's more that than they don't want the help, because that would not lend itself to the common complaint of there isn't any help available.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Just to backpedal, I wasn't saying they don't want the help. I'm saying they don't want what Daniel was saying. They don't want the handout.
Right.
They
I
don't
worded
want-
that poorly.
because it victimizes you. Do
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes you appear weak,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and that's not what we're bred to.
Here's what I realized though
Mm.
is the only way I was going to get stronger was by healing myself in ways, right? And with something as complicated as a brain injury, there is no magic pill. There is no cure, right?
Yeah.
There's only like basically supportive care that you can do to like strengthen your brain and like, you know, luckily the vestibular system, something you can kind of toy with, but there's so many different things to overcome. Sometimes it's like overwhelming, right? Like the list of symptoms you're dealing with, or like the problems that you're dealing with, can be so overwhelming. It's like, how do I start tackling this? And you have to kind of like systematically figure out a way to just start getting forward progression. And for me, I realized as much as I avoid trying to get help from people, I realized as much as I like helping people, I can't help people now unless I help myself.
Yeah.
And so I need to get over whatever it is, this whole like not wanting to receive help, not wanting to feel like I'm receiving handouts. Like I need to get over that so that I can heal myself, so that I can help others.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I talk to my wife about that all the time, because Keith Snuck, I've probably seen it, but like we have some of the best neighbors possible. And it took me and my wife a little bit to kind of get used to that, because we've lived at multiple other places where we didn't even know our neighbors. And like when
I
we've
think
gone
they
to,
watched your kids more this weekend than
I have. Yeah,
You
they've
have.
seen my two kids more than I have this weekend. But it's like, and the same thing when I go out of town, they watch our dogs. And like me and my wife feel very weird asking them for help to watch our dogs. We can always go take them wherever we go, but they love our dogs. They're just great people. And eventually what I ended up having to tell my wife, because she ended up having more of an issue with it than I did. And I was like, if they asked us, would we do it? And she's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, people like helping people in general. Everybody likes helping people. And I'm like, even though, they're offering and we may feel like we're taking advantage occasionally, as long as we really aren't, they're getting a sense of satisfaction from that too.
Yeah.
They love helping us. They love our boys. They love our dogs. And anytime we've watched their dogs, anytime we've helped out any case, any capacity with any of our friends, we enjoy it, you know?
Yeah.
And so asking for that help, like that's what builds a community. That's what builds a relationship, all that. And then to kind of go off of a point that you were making earlier, and if you don't mind me doing a little plug, one of the things that really set off kind of one of my journeys with asking for help, and the one and only program I've ever really got anything free from, was Rob Cosman's Purple Heart Project. He's actually a Canadian who does hand tool woodworking. And so most things nowadays are all power tools.
Yeah.
That home, the machinery, it's not good for anybody, really. So he does nothing but planes and hand saws. And
That's awesome.
I love it. And the part of the program is he gives you all of that for free based off of donations from very, very generous people, and is the top of the line equipment. And at the end of it all, it was right when Dead Reckoning was taking off. It was right when all of it was taking off. So he and I talked a lot, and he and I still keep in touch, which doesn't keep up in touch with a lot of the people who go through the program. And he asked me to do an interview at the very end of it. And the way I kind of ended up processing it at the end of it, because it took me a very long time to even apply for the project. And one of my buddies at work, he's really big into woodworking, and he's the one who found out about that, similar to this gallery, you know. Not the same guy, but just, again, when you talk about the stuff you're interested in, it usually falls into your lap of taking advantage of those opportunities whenever they kind of arise. And so I did it, and none of us want a lending hand. We want a working hand philosophy. So he taught us how to use these tools. Sure, he gave them to us. He taught us how to use them, and then actually make something from them, learn from them, and he just laid the foundation. Now I've learned how to do so much more with them outside of that class, watching even more of his videos and everything, but it was a working hand philosophy. He just gave me another skill that I was able to contribute to not only my life, but I've made my mom and my sister's birthday and Christmas presents the past year or two based off of stuff like that.
Yeah. And what was his name again, and what was the program?
Yeah, again, like I know no shame at all because it's an incredible program, but it's Rob Cosman, Purple Heart Project. So seriously, you don't have to have a Purple Heart to apply for the program. The way he words is if you were affected by the traumas of war, pretty much. So he's not a veteran himself. The guy who he runs the program with is a veteran. But if you feel like you have any kind of, he uses the word disabilities, but any kind of effects from war, you qualify for the program. And I've sent 2 of my friends through it, and they both loved it.
Tyler recorded a podcast with him as well.
Yeah.
So if you guys are interested in hearing more about the program,
He is one of the best guys I'll ever know, and he's just super cool. He's I'm not going to go into his whole story, but just a very interesting guy, and he just wants to give back. And,
So-
and he knows a lot of very influential and wealthy
You say
people.
he's Canadian, right?
Yeah, and he's Canadian.
Yeah.
You know, and he lives in New Brunswick, and he I was telling Keith about him earlier. He loves American politics. It's like their sitcom.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just the same thing. He just wants to. Man, we're spoiled. Me and Keith talking about like there's no better time probably in history to be a veteran.
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
It's insane. It's hard for me to complain about much of anything with all the opportunities we have. And so I still, same thing. I have much of my buddies are either still in or they've got out the same time I did. And again, I've had a relatively easily transition, but I've also taken advantage of a lot of what offers. And I say take advantage kind of lightly because it's like, don't hate the player, hate the game. You know, it's like, it's out there. Why would you not do it?
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
there.
And like you said, the people who are running those programs have a heart for
Exactly.
it. And the benefit they get from helping
Exactly.
people. Like I would say, you know, probably some of the best feeling you can have is helping someone else. Or
A servant's heart, man. I know I have it, and it's incredible.
There was one weird instance where I actually didn't enjoy helping people.
I want to hear it. Let's
Go
do it.
on.
Doing some disaster relief down in
Yeah. So they.
where is that? It's down near not Austin, east of San Antonio, Bandera, Texas.
Okay.
There was a river flooding there, and it was weird. It was just like I was volunteering through Team Rubicon,
Yep.
Yeah.
and we did. There was flooding down there, so we were going out doing muck out operations where you like clean out these people's houses, and I mean, it was just destroyed. Like everything in these people's house. If you look around your house or your apartment or wherever you live, and like put a mark at like 6 feet on the wall, and then everything down from that is destroyed.
Yeah.
Family photo albums, like everything is just completely destroyed. And you're cleaning out these people's houses and stuff, and something about it, I wasn't like ready for it. Like from being a med, I was a casket bearer my first 2 years in. I was doing funerals in Arlington. Like I became a medic, you know, treating people who died, like being in a war zone as a medic, you know, treating a bunch of people. And then all of a sudden I found myself at this disaster site, and like it was this weird feeling. I was kind of pissed. I was like, what?
Do you think it's like because you knew immediately like those people didn't? I mean, obviously nobody deserves some of the outcomes that they get, but like those people didn't put themselves in harm's way. Those people didn't live in a war zone, you know, because you probably saw families affected by war in Afghanistan too. So what I'm asking is like, do you think the reason it upset you so much was because they were just living and they weren't, you know, expecting what happened?
I don't know. I can't really put my finger on it. It was weird to me that I was like, I literally had to sit there and think like, I should be feeling really good right now.
Yeah.
Helping these people. And they were so thankful, right, that we're there, like, helping them out. But for some reason, it was just like I was crawling out of my skin. Like, I couldn't stand it. And it was just a really weird feeling. And like I said, that's the only time helping people hasn't felt good. And and I think it is just, I think it's tied more into just like how much I helped. I guess how much I shifted throughout my transition, right?
Yeah.
Going from like where my job is to help people every day to now I'm helping myself. And so when I made that shift, I think like maybe dipping back into a actually similar way, right? Because a disaster zone can be kind of like a war zone, right? I think it was almost like dipping back into that role that I was in is maybe why. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure they were appreciative of your help either way.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I was gonna ask you. So you're living in Canada.
Yeah.
Right? And so, some other countries have Veteran Day type events, and what is it in Canada? It's called Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
right?
So a lot of the holidays are the same in Canada. Like obviously Christmas and all that. They have a different Thanksgiving. It's at the end of October, or mid-October, I think. I don't know. We celebrate both because turkey's sweet. But so November 11th, what is Veterans Day in the U.S., I think it started in the U.K., but Canada is a Commonwealth nation, so they celebrate Remembrance Day, which is similar to our Memorial Day. And it's a pretty cool holiday.
For those that don't know the difference at Veterans Day and Memorial Day, you want to cover that real quick?
Yeah, so it's, I mean, again, the celebrations are very similar because a lot of people assume that Veterans Day is to, praise the fallen, whereas obviously Memorial Day in the United States is to remember the fallen who've fallen in our nation's wars. Similar to, I think in Canada they do have Armed Forces Day, but I don't think they really do anything for it because everybody just pulls out all the stops on Remembrance Day. So they thank veterans and remember the fallen veterans all in one day and then just get it out of the way for the year. But it's a cool celebration. They do a lot of cool things. I've been a part of some really beautiful events and been able to kind of witness some other stuff. I also just recently went to an annual, it's just before Remembrance Day, but it's called Take a Veteran to Dinner. And it's like this banquet, and the idea is that a civilian is supposed to invite a veteran and his or her significant other. So we've gone a couple years in a row now. My friend Kevin is the son of a Vietnam veteran. He was a Marine. He was a colonel. And we go out every year. He also invites a Canadian guy who crossed the border into Buffalo. He's a Vietnam veteran, also a Marine. And then he did his time, and then he went back to Canada and taught. And there were a lot of Canadian Vietnam veterans who did the same thing. They crossed the border to enlist, where a lot of guys were getting drafted here. So
yeah,
And escaping Canada.
yeah, and a lot of those guys just went to it. His story was actually he wanted to be a pilot, and the Canadian Forces told him at the time, at the late '60s, and they told him like all our slots are full. And they told him to come back in a couple months, and so he decided, he was going to do some young man stuff and just cross the border and enlist instead because he knew there was a war going on. So
yeah, that's a wild idea. Is like the whole what drives someone to enlist during a time of war.
Yeah,
and like whereas like there's a draft at the time, and people are trying to avoid it. I know we wanted to kind of touch on World War I, and I was traveling across the country in Kansas City, Missouri. There's the World War I National Memorial there.
Yep.
And one of the cool facts I saw there on display was that there was no draft. They had so many volunteers during World War I, Americans. And if you think about it, it's like we were kind of coming late to the game. So like World War I had been going on for a while, and then America kind of went into it for kind of interesting reasons, like kind of like, hey, we want to be on the map internationally. And so like we didn't even get attacked, right? So like, but we were just like, hey, they had so many American men just like, oh yeah, oh there's a war going on, yeah, we'll go.
Yeah.
And so many so that they didn't have enough weapons to train with. There was guys doing training with broomsticks before they went over to like the trenches and fought in World War One. And just think about where we are today,
Yeah.
where we're having trouble finding like qualified candidates.
Yeah, it's World War One's recently intrigued me as well because of that turn of the century and how soon after the industrial revolution it was, and how large scale of a war it was.
Insane. It's the first industrialized war.
Yeah, and I never really processed that in high school. I wasn't a very big history buff. Again, like I said, I was more in the math and sciences. But recently, it's really intrigued me. And then you read some of the war books then and the philosophies, and it was a very intellectual time. It was right after Freud. It was right after Einstein was during that time. Like really big paradigm shifts within society, and like that's when the world started getting smaller. There's a whole world that was in war, you know. And so when you read these, it's very easy to see the parallel till now. I don't know much about the Revolutionary or Civil War, but like I think it was pretty much just those guys, you know. Where the World War, there's so many different dynamics. There's so many different school of thoughts. It was Eastern and Western philosophies. It was this huge mechanical and industrial boom and thought, like and intellectualism in itself was part of it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what kind of sparked the idea of a lot of the wars. And so when we watched that documentary, it's like so much of them were thinkers after that time too, where they're like, oh, well, we can't get in war for ideology anymore. And
Yeah.
it's like, if you think about it, that's how war's always been, other than like land, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Ideology is usually
Well-
the reason, obviously, you know?
So this audiobook I was listening to actually when I first met you guys, it's the collection of, I guess, Robert Howard's work, and he's the one that did the Conan the Barbarian tales. And, you know, my online handle is Daniel the Barbarian, and I'm
Mhm.
like, it's been in my like list of things to, you know, listen to. I'm like, hey, if I'm going to call myself Daniel the Barbarian, I need to listen to this shit.
Yeah.
But he also did like Solomon Kane stories and stuff, but he was born in 1908. And the beginning of this audiobook, they just go into huge detail about him and like his childhood, his influences, and like what was going on during the time that led to like his writing and everything. And surprisingly, they talked about World War One in that, and that this period of time, things were shifting from like a royalty type mentality, and like the reasons people would go to war, right, is like, well, we're the kings and we send our like, you know, serf people that don't matter to us to like go fight. But during this time, it was like a shift away from that to this like national pride. Like it was basically like, hey, we can't get people to fight for us anymore as like our servants or slaves, but we need this idea of like national pride. If you think about watching that World War One documentary with the British, like how much nation pride they had during that time,
It became a point of pride and
almost
almost a mark of manhood, a rite of passage to go and serve your country.
Yeah, and you're like, it's the United States of America, right? It's a
Nationalistic. In a
it's
way.
it's what is it, right? It's something we believe in.
Yeah.
It's not something, you know. It's really not something physical. It's an idea.
It's an abstract.
Sangan Instruments just posted a really, really cool narrative about World War One veterans returning. Did you read it?
Yeah,
The one that I'm talking
I
about?
deployed with the owner
Yeah.
of Singing Instruments.
So, man, like they post some really good stuff. Like aside from their incredible Raider-owned watch company.
Yeah, we actually did a patrol together in the Helmand.
Cool.
Good deal.
And like aside from delivering a really cool product, they post some really good content. And what they were talking about was the return of World War One veterans and the cut to disability and pensions for veterans, and the fact that all those guys, you know, decided like, hey, we're going to use our GI Bill because that was what was still available, and they, you know, they were going to get paid. Their education was going to get paid for, and a lot of people were worried about veterans hitting the scene and like ruining these institutions because they were like these war hardened heathens. And
gonna let the savages in our
like
hollowed halls,
broken arrow, like they're inside the wire, but
yeah.
The national averages of all these universities like just skyrocketed because they just crushed it. And it's but then you look at that documentary, They Shall Not Grow Old, and they talk about how they couldn't get jobs at all when they got back. No one wanted them. They wanted them to go fight the war, and they wanted them to come home at a certain point, but they didn't know what the hell to do with them. Robert Graves is a really good author and poet from that era. He was an officer for England during World War I, and he's written some incredible stuff.
So my favorite author is C.S. Lewis, and he's a World War I veteran. And we've talked about it on our podcast a couple times. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's A Hobbit, A Wardrobe, and a Great War.
Yeah.
And it's the book that references Tolkien and C.S. Lewis's journey through World War I. Growing up, they both were officers, their time kind of in service, and then the aftermath of that, and how it influenced their writings. And so I'm sure most people know, obviously, with The Lord of the Rings and The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, but what World War I offered those two writers is it showed them the physical representation of the will to power and the representation of good versus evil.
Yeah.
And I've talked about it a lot, and I'll never deny it, is when you're in war, you see the far ends of both spectrums of benevolence and violence, good and evil. You witness the extremes. And so our scope is completely it's as big as it gets, And so when you see those, there's no way to really hide from that truth and that reality. And those two authors just did it justice with those long narratives. And it talks about their theology a little bit with Christianity and everything, but really it focuses more on what the war itself offered those two authors, of what it demonstrated with what reality and fantasy, and the connection between the two, and how all of us are ingrained with this desire of will to power is kind of the source of evil. It's that control, that power, that kind of willing ignorance and discrimination is the kind of the source of evil, and how ingrained it is into humans. It's written on our hearts. But at the same time, that warrior, benevolent savior is written on our hearts as well. And it was a cool book, but World War I just showed those extremes and documented them so well.
Yeah. World War I was a war during like a big, huge disruption in the way humans live on this earth, kind of like we are too. We're living in the we fought in a war that's in the technological disruption, right? Which leads me to my point that agreeing with you that we have it better than anybody as far as veterans are concerned. But I think we're also like the last ones to have it the best. Like we've achieved veteran.
We're the pinnacle.
The pinnacle.
We're the zenith.
Because guess what? The people who are going to have it the worst are the next veterans, the robots. 'Cause they're just going to get discarded, dude. They're just going to get thrown away.
It's going to happen.
Do you think they're going to have it?
Tinfoil hats dropped from the ceiling.
Do you think they're going to have a VA? Like,
you can't.
Right?
No,
right?
you
We
can't
literally
save
are
those
the
robots.
last ones. We are like the ruling class of the veterans.
You can't. You don't want to keep those
some
robots.
way, for sure.
If
But you know
if
what? Though,
Skynet
I
taught
think-
us anything, you don't keep those robots around.
I think that cutting veterans' benefits and alleviating responsibility to take care of the people that you send to war is a very, very consistent theme, and it will always be that way. So yeah, we can, like we're sitting around this table and saying like the VA's done a lot of good, guys. Like, don't bitch so much, but bitching is important too.
Yeah.
Constructive.
The advocacy, yeah, of course. Like but not everybody's gonna be. I don't know.
Emotions gonna be involved, yeah.
Be balanced, be content, but also like understand that like people advocated so that we have what we have today, the Vietnam generation especially, and understand the importance of that, the action of advocacy and not settling and not just saying this is good enough.
And that is a really important part. I was just kind of saying all that to lead into a joke, but about robots.
Oh, I thought the robot part was the joke.
yeah. But you're totally right. And there's, I think I had to kind of navigate that.
I want to hear the joke now.
No, the joke was
the joke was the robots.
Oh, it was the robots.
You're saying the people after us are going to have it the
I
worst.
thought I ruined it.
Yeah,
God, that was funny.
The next veteran is the robot.
Haha.
yeah. But
it's going to happen.
My wife would argue that I'm a robot, but anyways,
they train you.
That was kind of difficult for me to navigate. Is like coming from the medical field and having an understanding of how where I was a providing medicine to people, and now I'm on the receiving end of that, being very frustrated with the quality of it. I wanted to scream, like I wanted to yell about it. Which isn't always productive.
Yeah,
it's actually the more you can be constructive and present your case in sort of like a solution based, like, hey, here's a problem and here's a solution to it, as opposed to being like, hey, there's a fucking problem.
Which is how I was raised in the military. Like, if you're gonna say something stupid, you better come up with something smart. Like,
right.
Don't bitch if you don't have a better idea.
Yeah, and so that's kind of how I see it with the VA, with the military medicine is stuff is like, I know I have really high expectations for the level of care we should be giving.
Sure.
And a lot of what we're dealing with is brain injury too, which is a very misunderstood thing. Mm-hmm. And the thing I don't agree with is, sort of taking, psychological meds and a handful and just kind of throwing at it and at stuff we don't understand.
Yeah.
And that's the stuff that frustrates me, but I can provide a solution to that. It's like, hey,
I think that's a problem for the whole country too, right?
We need to look at the standard of care. Yeah. We need to that's where we can start shifting things. But to sit there and just scream like, hey, we're giving pills, like it doesn't do anything, right? Yeah. Like what solution are you providing?
Yeah.
But
what's that Roosevelt quote, right? Yeah. Complaining without a solution is whining.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Yeah.
And there's no reason we shouldn't, though, right? We shouldn't be improving just because we like we mentioned all the reasons we have it good. You should always leave things better than when you found them,
right?
Absolutely. Just so we should, be setting it up where I think a lot of people don't realize too is the more you invest in the care of veterans, like when you start tackling these problems of traumatic brain injury, guess what? It's not just in the veteran population.
No.
It translates over to civilian injuries and civilian populace.
Oh, look at trauma medicine over the last 20 years.
That's what I was about to say.
Like, how do you think you have your recreational diving tables?
Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the Naval Experimental Dive Unit?
Absolutely.
It's like a lab rats, dude.
Well,
straight up
like
lab
you just
rats.
mentioned with trauma medicine is being in the fire service now. Frontline medicine, in some sense, all of our treatment protocols, trauma-wise, are based off research that the military has done since Vietnam, at least.
Yeah. Remember how taboo tourniquets used to be?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
In the civilian sector?
They hated it. They still are somewhat
like
skeptical.
Somebody has artillery or bleed, and you're supposed to just elevate their arm and
pinpoint
send
pressure.
up a prayer.
All the cops have little
remember,
pouches with T's on them now. Yeah. So
I can remember being taught when I first came in the Army that tourniquet was the absolute last, at the you run out of every other option, throw a tourniquet on there. But that was your last resort, and now that is the go-to that they are teaching up, even the most basic of trainees.
Yeah. And it was just a misunderstanding, right?
They're telling them to put it on for anything. Scraped elbow, tourniquet, immediately.
Yeah. And I think that was kind of birthed out of war medicine. But there's such a high potential for medical discoveries inside taking care of the veterans from war, because you're seeing here's what's kind of unique about it, as opposed to waiting, studying people think of people with brain issues the elderly with dementia and stuff, and
Yeah.
trying to study them. With your veteran population, you kind of have like a younger, somewhat healthy
Yeah.
population that is dealing with these issues that I think is a better, like, sort of
Specimen.
specimen.
It's what they are, yeah.
And so, and can still like try new things that maybe not work, but it's not going to
Yeah.
like kill them, right? Or stuff.
Even like the NFL
But-
and the NHL, where you know they started doing research. You know, I think they probably jumped on it quicker than the DoD did.
Yeah,
But like they're not going to deal with the kind of volume that we are.
yeah,
I
No
will
way.
say, to the military's credit, they are, as I too have quite a few traumatic brain injuries, 2 of which were incredibly severe. They've left me with debilitated fine motor skills. I almost actually stutter when I write. It's super weird for all of us. And a pretty impressive sleep disorder.
Great rollerblader though.
I'm one hell of a rollerblader. So check YouTube circa 94. But
Shred.
Soul Skate. Regardless, though, I know right now, for example, Fort Bragg, and I'm sure it's spread across different installations. I just happen to be at Fort Bragg, but Fort Bragg has a phenomenal traumatic brain injury laboratory set up, anything and everything. It's in multiple buildings too, so they were kind of contained in this one fairly large, brand new state-of-the-art facility, and they expanded even further, and made a whole auxiliary setup where they do not only do they do their internal testing on the installation, but they do all kinds of studies and whatnot, what have you, with different universities and research groups across the nation, and they pay you to go. There's little to nothing your command can do
I
to
think
stop
Tampa
you
has
for
a lot
it.
of stuff now too.
Tampa absolutely
Yeah.
does. But I'm almost, and I could be speaking out of turn here, could be completely inaccurate, but I'm pretty sure Fort Bragg spearheaded that, or was on the tip of the spear doing that. So I know the Army, or the military, at least the Army, has grown leaps and bounds from when I first started getting my head injuries to now, when I first started having issues versus now when I bring them up. And rather than being like, well, then just don't do that. You won't have it won't hurt if you don't do that. Now it's more in the vein of like, go ahead and go talk to this person. They know exactly what to do.
I got told by a neurologist between my second and third deployment, just don't get blown up.
Right. That's exactly. Well, I'm sorry.
And I like had
Sound
this
advice,
flashback
Doc.
of like all the explosions I was the prior deployments, and I knew I was deploying to the same area. I was like,
Yeah.
okay,
Not doing
all right, I'll try.
What? You know what? I should have. That's what I was doing wrong. I've been meaning to. I knew it was something.
It's kind of important to kind of preface it again when earlier we were talking about the VA and same thing with the armies. There's a bureaucracy with it, and it has to follow the law, the federal law, and we all know how difficult that is to change, and the resistance everybody usually has to change.
Yeah.
And so when people get frustrated with the VA for different policies, or even the Army, it's like if you keep fighting, eventually it's going to go the right direction.
Yeah.
It's just.
Yeah.
And
There's checks and balances. There's a reason. Yeah.
It takes a long time to change standard of care.
Well,
Like
yeah.
the set of rules, like, hey, we do this, and protocols.
When did they start
Like-
teaching tournikeets in the military?
Yeah.
Like I went through basic in 2008 and we didn't touch it. We did
So I went in
IVs.
11, and
Yeah.
so 2011 we weren't teaching IVs anymore. We were focusing on tourniquets.
So
Yeah.
somewhere between there. But
08 and
that's
11.
I can
I
tell
went
you.
through core school in 2006, and in field med school, you're doing like it was like sticks and rag tourniquets.
yeah.
That's
It
crazy.
wasn't like
like the cats
cats,
or anything.
cats or anything.
Yeah.
I did basic
So-
training in 06, and we did not talk about it aside from sticks and
Yeah.
cravats, like kind of improvised tourniquets as
Yeah.
a last resort. But I can also tell you that up to like 3 months ago, I was a drill sergeant, and for the 2 years previous that I was a drill sergeant up until a couple months ago, I was teaching my basic trainees and the medics that came to do a more refined medical course. They were all learning. Tourniquets was like the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's yeah, that was some sort of seen directly. A lot of the military medicine stuff bleeds over from special operations medicine.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
like they had been
a
doing
lot of stuff does.
they had been doing the tourniquet stuff for a while, and it was funny because I went through a special operations medic course at Bragg, and then that's probably why a lot of the brain stuff is at Bragg, and then down at Tampa, those are kind of special operations hubs. But the going through the special operations medic course, I had just gone through the field medicine course, and I'm like, oh man, I was missing a lot of information. But there's always more you can learn, and I think there's good providers and there's bad providers, right? And so I think a lot of people get discouraged too. They go see one bad medical provider, and like I've seen some really bad neurologists, and these are like some of the highest paid doctors, right? Like you think they're
good
the
enough
best,
for government
right?
work.
And I think the thing I learned is you can't give up. You gotta, just because you get told to pound sand by one person, like you got to figure out how to be okay in your own skin. Like you got to figure out how to be able to be okay and live this life and keep moving forward in a positive direction. And to do that, you can't just don't let somebody ruin your day. Don't let somebody ruin your life. Like don't let a doctor or bad provider get in your way. There's good ones out there. You just have to find them. Yep. Which leads me to like, have y'all done any talk therapy at all? Like going and sitting with somebody?
That's been my main form.
Yeah.
I've never really done any therapy.
I've done some talk therapy, but I guess what I was gonna say is like, I think some of the stuff we were talking about earlier has the same effect. Writing poetry, doing woodworking, getting those kind of like finding these things that are therapeutic for you are ways to get, instead of you just rattling these things around in your brain, getting it out. And sometimes it is talk therapy. Talk therapy was beneficial for me for the time I was doing it, you know? But I think it's important to just explore different ways and don't be afraid of sort of stigmas getting in the way. I used to have this like stigmatized view against talk therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have a stigmatized view of yoga. Like, I thought men didn't do yoga.
I love yoga.
You know?
I think it's important to realize, like you just said, like it's rattling off in your head. And the big thing, kind of the cliche saying is like that, my truth, my reality, my perception, or whatever the case may be. It's like, I get that, and we were talking about subjectiveness earlier, but really when you put it out again in this physical plane that we all operate in through speech, through action, that's when it becomes real, and that's when it's able to be kind of analyzed. And you can't always necessarily depend on like majority rule, but like I'll say something that I think is a good idea, and Keith let me know, no, that's a shitty idea. Like people aren't right, you know. Your own biases, confirmation bias is your own bias toward yourself. Like we think we're so much smarter than we really are, or we think we're so much worse than we really are. And when you put it out there, people can kind of confirm or deny those, you know. And so you have to make things real. You have to make those thoughts real, or if you realize they're not, like if it's not warranted, like you're done with it. Move on from those. Yeah. You know, you have to talk about, you have to make them real. And even writing them is kind of hard because it's such a personal thing with just you and yourself. Almost give it to somebody or maybe throw it away, but if you're throwing it away, then obviously you're throwing it away for a reason. Like discard it. Discard those emotions, discard those thoughts, but putting it out there for somebody else to interpret, especially somebody that you trust that is going to be open and honest with you, it just, man, there's nothing but, you're only going to benefit from it.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
There's just like, I don't think there's one answer. You know,
there isn't.
And I've benefited a lot from just being open to following whatever comes up in my gut and my intuition. Like that's what's led me to stuff that I wouldn't typically do before. And if it kind of like came up in my awareness and I was like, you know what, I should try this. And I did. And every time I've done that, it's been beneficial, you know. And instead of thinking, what will people think? You know, what are my preconceived notions about this thing? You know? But yeah, World War One, dude, it's so
I
gnarly.
know. I keep
out of
looking at
control.
that We the
The
Willing
statistics
yeah.
alone.
print behind you.
I can feel it behind me.
It's probably 'cause I'm staring at it.
I can feel it.
I'm not looking at your hairline.
Yeah,
Bruh.
I got the. This is the. You guys are the second podcast I've done in my sort of updated studio.
It's a nice setup.
Yeah,
Man, you done a good job.
That's
Yeah.
really cool.
this is. Yeah, so I deployed with the guys from We the Willing Collective. I've done some podcasts with them as well, where we talk about death and dying. Dude, you mentioned.
Good topics.
Yeah, no, I think
They're
I mean,
important ones.
you mentioned that
It's an
earlier. It's like
occupational hazard.
not talking to your kids about the war or stuff like when
Mm.
they're too young. You know what? That's why I mentioned World War One. I knew I was coming around to something. Sometimes it's like searching through my
Yeah,
brain. You know,
I meant to do that.
like the Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah.
That was written by a World War One
Yep.
guy who's trying to share his experience with his kid.
Yeah.
And I don't, maybe there is a too young of age, but I think death and dying is one of those things we don't talk about enough as a society. It's become taboo in a sense, and maybe like American culture is why we have some Instagram person being like, hey, we shouldn't talk about World War II because of the death and dying in it, right?
Mm.
Whereas I think other cultures are very much more it's just a part of everything. It's very much more engraved in their traditions, and
It's the way you go about it, I think. I think it would absolutely be the way you go about doing that.
Yeah.
That would make a difference.
Well, and it back to what you were referencing, like when I was talking about my son earlier.
Mhm.
I talk to his class like every year for the last 3. Like this is the 3rd year I've gone in and talked to his class, and he's 8, so they're at the age now where I feel it's appropriate. Like they can they've known of something or someone dying, whether it's a plant or a guinea pig or a grandparent, or I always ask, like, does anybody have anybody who's in the military? And some kids don't understand it all. Like one kid was telling me that his dad engineered planes and like built jetliners, and I was like, that's not the same thing.
You're dumb, kid. You're dumb. Get it together.
And then they like, there's another little girl who was like, oh, my grandfather died in the war. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, what war? She was like, well, he died a couple of years ago. And I was like, no, I don't think that one either.
Not it.
But it's that's interesting, like their cognitive process and how they remember
awesome,
things.
man.
But again, like, back to my point, like this is the first year I've actually shared information about specific people that I know, that I feel that they should know about, that they'll benefit from knowing about. And it goes to that old saying, like, if you stop saying their names, then they die.
Coco.
Yeah.
If you have kids.
So.
Oh, I've seen it. I don't have kids, and I've seen it.
It's actually a good movie.
I thought that was like the name of like a cherished childhood pet that passed away. I'd
No.
not make that
I'm
connection.
gonna run to the bathroom.
Yeah. So.
Well, you've heard my opinion on it before, Keith, and I want to kind of touch on it whenever he comes back about the death and dying. But also, like, and he kind of mentioned about the Instagram influencer who's saying we shouldn't talk about it. But we also have these Instagram influencers who are almost, like, glorifying trauma and loss and kind of, like, not necessarily monetizing it, but, like, that's how they're making their mark, and that's how they're becoming known. That's how they're becoming famous, is, like, I'm always broken. All of you guys can be broken, and I still push hard.
Right.
And I'm a pretty big fan of the school of thought that we need to be talking about the guys that are being hurt and the guys and girls that died, so that when we decide, hey, we're going to invade such and such, or we're going to cut ties with such and such, we understand the ramifications of conflict. And that, I think, is the most important thing. And, back to talking to my kids' class, the fact that they understand that, like, them shooting in a video game is based on, one kid was talking about how it's based off, I play Call of Duty Modern Warfare, and it's based off of real events. And I explained the video games are cool, but you know, war is real, and it's not.
Nobody's fighting through an airplane, shooting the bad guys
Very
before it
few,
falls down.
very few respawn points.
Yeah, if any.
It's a long wait.
I actually used that example. I said, you know, I actually asked them. I said, you know, what happens when you die in a video game? And they said you come back. And
That don't happen. Dan, now that you're back, I just mentioned it briefly, but we were talking about how it's important to talk about the topics of death and dying, and trauma and loss. But what are your kind of impressions on people who are kind of making their name and making their mark about going through those hard times and then like kind of monetizing it in a way, or kind of creating their whole identity about how they've struggled and they're always struggling, yet they're always persevering, yet they're always overcoming in a way, and you should too. And I get like the motivational speech behind it, and it is inspiring in some sense. But what are your thoughts?
Like,
I don't know if I'm not being specific enough, but
yeah, could you elaborate on it a little more? Like, so
right now, like we're talking about how we have one social media influencer saying we shouldn't talk about World War II because of the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But then on the other hand, I see a lot of social media influencers pretty much only talking about that and kind of talking about their trauma, their loss, their truths, their perseverance going through these hard times, and like that's what they've become known for.
That's their shtick.
Yeah, they have the endurance to endure whatever bad comes their way all the time because they've gone through so much.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say out of it. I never really do. But for some reason, I'm almost bothered by it because they're almost becoming famous off of their misfortunes. Yet most of the time, those are either self-induced, they've done it to themselves, or it's just a part of their reality that like you gotta just have to go through. Like you shouldn't be rewarded for dealing with divorced parents the way you have, or dealing with the death of whatever, or to be completely honest, why does anybody care if you I shouldn't say that.
Say it.
Why should I glorify you for beating suicide in some sense? You know, like I know that's kind of controversial, and I do admire people who didn't actually do it. But at the same sense, why should I look up to you? At the same sense, I don't know. This is like one of the first times I'm really actually saying it out loud, so I don't know exactly how I'm feeling about it. But
kick it around.
No, it makes a lot of sense since you like elaborated on it, and I can kind of like provide. I guess,
what's your thoughts on it? Like,
thoughts.
Like I said, one of my first times actually saying it out. So.
Good.
So
yeah.
So
it's harsh, but man, I kind of don't care at times.
Yeah, a couple of. So you covered like a couple things. Yeah. So I'm just gonna kind of like hit on some of them. Is the people cling on to identities.
Yeah.
Things that they feel that is them, right? And when you allow those things can like kind of creep in or just like kind of overtake you in your perceived identity, how you see yourself in this world, in this plane, in this reality. And I think that's the importance of introspection. It's an importance of like critically looking at yourself and like analyzing the different sides of you. Hey, why do I feel this way? Why do I feel this is my identity? Is this really my identity? And also getting feedback from people who see you differently than you see yourself, and being open to that, right? And so I think that's what creates somebody who's kind of limited. I think it's a limiting view. I think they're limiting themselves from obtaining their full potential by letting something become their identity that isn't inclusive of who they are as a complete person.
Yeah. One of the things that kind of comes to mind is you're saying that, and again, this is a very easy point of reference because I'm finishing it right now, but I'm finishing Orange is the New Black right now on Netflix, and Piper, the main character, she gets out of jail in this last season,
Dude,
And
spoilers.
Spoiler,
Jesus.
dude. Oh, Jesus.
Christ.
It's the second to last season, and she's been out. All right, you obviously know she writes the freaking series.
Didn't know.
Well, she's at her workplace, and she finally just announced, "I'm an ex-con. I've been to federal prison," because it's just eating at her for all that. And her dad tells her, he's like, "Is this just like a millennial thing that you have to share everything?" And the way I can kind of compare it is the people who I've kind of idolized in my life was like my dad and older generations is the quiet professionals. Nobody knew my dad was an SF dude. Still to this day, unless I tell them. And I usually don't tell most people, but it's like the people who just work hard, deal with their shit, and keep going.
So stoicism.
Exactly.
Strong, silent Clark Gable type.
Yeah, it's like, how is it? Like, that's, to me, that's still admirable. So it's like going through those hard times, processing them, and maybe dealing with, like, your close people, but this social media world that we're talking about that you're saying maybe it's not as relevant, get over it. I'm kind of almost on that same page as, like, why do you need to share it to just random people?
Yeah.
Because
And I get, like, it's an identity thing, and you want people to relate, and I've done this, you can do it. But
it doesn't have the again, cynicism. I don't believe that there are noble intentions behind it.
yeah,
I think it's a facade of nobility, and
Well-
but I think it's just so you can get that. It's the same way as somebody going, look, felt cute, might delete later. Like, oh no, it's a great picture. Yeah, I know it is, but keep them coming.
I think it's the reason that we also get the gratification that we do out of what we've built, and I hate saying what we've built.
Keep talking to your mic.
When I say what we've built, I mean like the audience that we've attracted, which is really, really cool. And we have poached certain communities for like minds. When we find a business or an individual like you who we see things in common with, we like exploit the shit out of that because it's rare. We have like a veteran community that everyone has a t-shirt business and they're all saying the same things. They all broadcast the same perspectives and stuff. But what I think is gratifying for us is when we actually sit back and we're like, holy shit, like, it may not be great in comparison to other people, but like it's all relative. Like when you're looking at like what we're putting out poetry and grunts are buying it.
Yeah.
Like that's a little bit mind blowing that we've got like almost 8,000 followers on Instagram, and like we haven't paid for anything. We haven't done any of that, but we also don't get the instant gratification that a lot of people do when they post something and will, obsess over the likes or the engagement or whatever.
Right.
We do that so that we reach a broader audience, but I think Tyler and I will at times just sit back and say like, holy shit, man, like we had a really good week, like social media wise, but we're not like glued to it trying to figure out, oh my God, what is this? And I think that's where like a lot of what Brian's saying, like the instant gratification is the dopamine's like the dopamine fix, like from cell phones and stuff.
And ultimately, I mean, I think one point to also add in there is like seeing somebody just through their social media until you meet them, like you have no idea what their reality, what their reality is. But having met some of the people that I think you were talking about, like I went to this trip in Denmark. They did a Warrior Week over there where they invited U.S. Veterans over.
Yeah.
And I went over, and one of the American veterans on the trip was a chick who like literally wore PTSD on her sleeve. Like she wore a hat the entire trip that said PTSD on it, and like some barbed wire or whatever. And
weird flex.
Yeah, and it's.
That's when the sign proceed with caution.
that's her identity, right? That's literally what she's projecting into this world. If you think, we like to kind of nerd out a bit, we're like wavelength projections, right? And so, we can kind of project ourselves out into the world, and that's the identity she's projecting out, right? Is I am PTSD.
Yeah.
The truth is you're so much more than that. And that's the beautiful side of it. You just have to like explore that and like get outside of that. But what causes that person to like get stuck in that identity, and kind of what you're talking about, is cultures, like certain veteran cultures that are unhealthy, right? The whole suicide deal, the whole 22 push-ups, bullshit.
Yep.
Like, what the fuck? And you know what? I went to a veteran entrepreneurship conference in Atlanta, and I did 22 push-ups on camera, and I was drunk at the time and had no idea like what I was getting into, and like this chick had known my older brother or whatever that was involved with the program and everything. But like, so I'm admittedly like have fallen victim to that, like, I'm doing something positive, right? And I think that's the slippery slope. I don't think everybody gets into it like, hey, I'm gonna like make money off of this, like me surviving suicide or something. I think some people get into it innocently enough and maybe think they're helping, or maybe they just haven't found the right way to express their voice, or maybe they haven't figured out the whole problem solution thing. They just want to yell about stuff. Yeah. And they haven't kind of like,
I don't think the cynics are doing any better. You know what I mean? Like just cutting it down.
Yeah.
Than the people who are raising awareness for an issue that is in the headlines all the time.
Yeah. And so, so I think a lot of what I've learned is finding balance in life, right?
Yeah.
And so just finding a way to navigate that. And I think it's a problem when you end up in any echo chamber where you're sitting around going rah, 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 rah. Everybody's agreeing with you all the time about the same things, right? And I think that's what creates cultures like that.
Well, so that's one of the things that I really try to be mindful of, and I've talked to Keith multiple times about it, and it's almost to a fault, is like this whole echo chamber thing is like exactly what Keith and I were trying to kind of stand up against. Yeah. And then when we started our podcast and we started making friends of like-minded individuals, like that phrase in itself is like, you're right now creating an echo chamber. That's what we're doing in some sense. And so I was always so worried of like,
but we're not though, because I'm confident also.
And I think we are for the most part doing a good job of it. Yeah. But I'm always constantly trying to even question ourselves of like what we agree with. Because I'm like,
when I think like minds, as in like-minded to us, I think even if they're with a mainstream perspective, like the 22 thing, they can justify it. They can make it make sense, right? Like a lot of people, like, I hate Ben Shapiro, but Tyler and I were talking about him earlier. Like, regardless of if I agree with his views or not, like, he takes a very logical standpoint and pursues an issue. We try to get people on the show that are mindful. That's the consistent theme.
That's like-mindedness is
mindfulness and being able to argue your point and believing in something.
And I've always, Megan Mobbs always said it in a way, and I've said it, and Daniel says like,
why don't you tell them who that is?
Megan Mobbs, clinical psychologist studying veteran transition at Columbia, and she is doing incredible work talking about more in depth about what PTSD is and what TBI could possibly be and how those possibly are misdiagnosis. Because it's just talking about how transition in itself,
transition stress,
from the military to the civilian world, is what's causing this imbalance. Whether that's stress physiologically or psychologically, it's the transition in itself of how the Army has indoctrinated you and kind of institutionalized you in some way of thinking of, like what Ryan was saying earlier about, he thought it was the former than the latter of, you were always told exactly what to do. Mm-hmm. You didn't have to think really necessarily for yourself, and there was a clear-cut way to succeed. They gave you the rule book of, you do X, Y, and Z, you'll make it to the next rank, you will succeed, you'll do all of this. This is the playbook. There's no hiding it. This is what it is. When in the civilian world, there's no clear-cut rules. There's some in a way, but it's just completely different. So that's what she is. But it's really, I guess, other than in actually war, but it's hard for me personally to stand on a hill and fight for any kind of idea or belief, because how subjective humans are, and I realize I am too, and I hate that about myself at times, of how I can't be that confident in certain ideas and beliefs or anything like that, and how other people are, and that's kind of going with that bias and that culture and everything, and it's almost to a fault.
Well, I think you kind of hit on something, which is the people transitioning out, and I think it does a lot come back to that identity, right? Where somebody that's transitioning and they can't move past their military identity, that kind of hangs them up. Whereas we were talking about the World War I veterans who started going to college, and they were like scoring the highest, bunch of entrepreneurs coming from all our past veterans and even this one, the GWAT era. And I was just talking to my older brother the other day about this, about that idea of college. Like, why do veterans do pretty well with college, right? Not all of them, right? But seems to be a trend, right? And he's got 3 kids, and he's actually thinking of encouraging them not to go to college right away. And that's because as much as the military was sort of, you're being told what to do in a sense and everything, but there is still a lot of decision making you have to do on your own. And I think it sets you up for later on in life as far as giving you context.
Yeah.
Instead of just going from high school into more school and college, I think that's where a lot of people are lost, right? They don't know what they want to do.
Absolutely.
It's just the next step, right? When my brother was suggesting maybe the next step should be go do something else.
Yeah.
Go do something else besides school, so when you're in school, you have some context to what you're doing.
Yeah.
Yep. Like I was saying, I'm going to school right now with TWU, and I'm talking to 18, 19-year-olds. Billy Madison kind of thing is that's probably the best way I've heard is just you have context. I'm taking an AP class because none of my medic ones transferred because they're emergency medicine, but I'm taking 18 to 22-year-old people that are going to be nurses. They don't know what being a nurse is, and so they don't understand why A&P is important other than just trying to memorize it, where I have so much more of a representation of why the mitochondria is important and why cell division is important and why we make energy.
I think
they don't, and the context is extremely important. So you have so much more life experience to talk to the teacher in an educated way, to reference on discussion boards, whatever the case may be on college.
Yeah. My wife and I were disasters in high school, and we found our callings later on. I'm just recently finding mine again because I realized I was on a track that I really didn't want to be on, so I went back to school thanks to the VA. But we both talk about the same thing, how we were not ready at 18, to go to school, and because you're deciding what you're going to do. And we both look at people with liberal arts degrees, and they ended up doing something totally different. So it's almost get some experience, go do something. I traveled a whole bunch. I toured with a band, just how I met my wife. And then after I settled down from that, I worked 2 jobs for a couple of years, worked, big 60, 70-hour work weeks, and still felt like I wasn't doing anything. And I had a couple friends that came home that got hurt, and I said, oh, shit, well, that's going on still, so let's go see what that's about. And found the military. That was a recruiter's worst nightmare in high school. I wanted nothing to do with it. I wasn't unpatriotic. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a knucklehead and skip class and get in fights at hardcore shows. It didn't. Ryan raises his fist. I was angry, and I didn't know why. And I think a lot of kids are like that. I finished a 2-year program at the school I went to when I first got out of the Army, and they asked me, because I was a mature student and I did well in the program, and I came from a different background than a lot of kids. They asked me to be on this program advisory board, and it was a law enforcement centric educational program. So it had like lots of police chiefs from different areas, and they were talking about maybe making this program part of their hiring requirements. Should one of these programs be part of their requirements for a candidate? And one of the questions that they started with was, who is the average student for this program? And I said, a kid who doesn't know what they want to do, because their parents are going to push them into school, and like it's a law enforcement centric program, so at least you're going to have interesting classes that deal with like break-ins and use of force and legalities and stuff like that. But like honestly, kids when they first get out of high school, they have no idea what they want to do, and it's going to change. Some have a clear path. We all know those people who knew from yay high what they wanted to do, and that's what they're doing right now.
That was me.
Yeah, exactly.
No clue.
Wasn't
But
me.
I'm not doing that anymore.
No, and and that's the thing. You have to. There's Plan Bs, and they're like eventually you might have to take a different path. But that's the beauty of education and all of that. So, yeah, I feel like I was going on.
You know what?
to make a
I think
point.
I didn't jump right into school.
No.
Well, actually, I did when I first got out.
Yeah.
And then I stopped going. There was this program at George Washington University for former special operations medic where they give you a bunch of accreditation. And it was towards like a medical administrator, it was like a bachelor's in disaster relief or something
emergency
like that.
management
Yeah.
or something.
And I just I started the semester and I was like, I can't fucking do this. Like, this is the same. Like, this is the same as that past.
Yeah.
Like, this is going from like high school to school, right? It's like, I just don't know what to do, so I'm doing this. And so I pulled out like immediately, and basically, I guess now I'm just realizing this, I basically had to regain context for schooling, because now with this next move I'm getting ready to do, I'm looking to go back to school, but for something completely different.
Yeah.
And it's actually journalism or something along those lines. So if I hadn't have kind of given myself that break, I would still be in classes for that degree, and doing something which is like the same when creating new neural pathways is so important to me now, it's so vital. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that till now.
Academically, I'm way outside my comfort zone.
Yeah.
Like I said, I was not a good student. And we talk about getting out of the military is a difficult decision. Well, then I went to school, and I'll be honest, I actually went to school because when I moved to Canada, I couldn't work legally. So I landscaped for a little bit and did renos and stuff like that. But in the winter, there's a lot less cash jobs that you can do, and I didn't know as many people, and I needed to make money. And so I was like, well, you know what? I'll use some of my GI Bill because I'll get the housing allowance.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking into school, and that's what I did. And my plan was to get into law enforcement. I finished a 2-year program, bridged to a bachelor's degree. It's a Bachelor of Human Services, which is kind of like a Bachelor of Criminal Justice, some different requirements and stuff, and a field placement. But recently, I realized I really did not, it wasn't suiting me anymore. The industry wasn't suiting me anymore. The field wasn't what I wanted to do. So I moved into social work, and so there you have 3 transitions, right? I'm leaving the military and that comfort zone, where you have the paycheck and all of that, and then I started school, which was another leap, and then I finished school. So I had a 2-year program as well as a bachelor's. I would have been successful in an application process with the police department, and I really just didn't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I was capable of something else. And school's been really, really tough so far. But I think that we all know that leaving your comfort zone is I think what we all thrive for too.
Yep.
Yeah. Seeking adversity.
Well, that's
Yeah.
that warrior, going to the unknown and all that.
Well, yeah. And frankly, nothing. I think the best rewards come from like the hardest work, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like, so
And support systems like is a big
yeah,
part to play in that. Like I know Tyler has a really incredible family. Like we've only just met you, but like your wife, it seems like an incredible person and very supportive and guiding of your process.
yeah.
And same with me. Like my wife has been really supportive in me pausing, forward career progression and going like kind of almost starting from scratch, like, career wise. So
Yeah.
yeah.
If you want to touch on relationships, like that's, I think our relationship has been benefited from her giving me space
Mm-hmm.
during the transition.
Her giving you space.
Yeah, and space to heal, like space and time to work on myself, and like realizing that whole idea that you can't help somebody unless you help yourself first.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't get that, especially in relationships. A lot of people, expect you to be able to help them because you're in a relationship with them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like that never fluctuates or
Yep.
should never falter. But yeah, giving people space to heal, something can like do wonders in a relationship, and not sort of have an unreal expectation of them.
So I find the opposite as
Yeah,
well
that's
too,
what I
though,
was about
where
to say.
I need and my wife does a pretty good job of it. Is like I need a kick in the ass sometimes,
Yep.
and
Yeah.
I need to be called out. Like I need to be held accountable.
It's very easy for me to be happy with just very little. I know how to be content with the bare minimum. And so individually, I'm very content. I can be happy with nothing. I can be happy with everything. Like I'm content with just whatever. But as soon as somebody else has to rely on my efforts, like my wife, I was always in team sports, the military team centric, fire service team centric. So it's like, and now with Keith, it's like, I've always thrived when others rely on my efforts. And so having a wife that not only she supports me, but I'll just say it kind of not too much time to it, but just like being a man of that relationship and that provider, like
Goes back to the culture.
I knew I had to provide. And so same thing, I had to be accountable not only to myself to heal, but again, I had to start taking care of her. And in order for me to take care of her, I had to help myself. And that was by pushing myself to that next objective. And so maybe I should have taken a little more time, but in a way, that transition of just hitting the ground running, I was already on that next mission as soon as I got out. And it has a lot to do with her, because if it was just by myself, man, I could have been wandering around the Appalachian Trail for months or something, or couch surfing with just old Army buddies just so I can go do whatever,
Yeah.
And I would have loved it. But how productive would that have been? Yeah, I would have done some soul searching and some introspectiveness, but I get to do that too with what I'm doing now. And so, I don't know. I guess it's just all different
Yeah.
for everybody. Like you said, there's no one result or one answer.
There isn't, yeah. And I think I had a really good I know I do, support structure with my older brother. Like him being wounded before me and going through the whole process, like was huge, right?
Yeah.
And him kind of being able to guide me along the way. But yeah, relationships, man. In the military, it's. I think relationships have just gotten in specifically. I'm not talking about just like friends and family. I'm talking about like wife, girlfriend, all that stuff. It's getting complicated nowadays. Well, I mean, it's always complicated trying to like join up with another human being on this crazy spinning planet, right? But
one of my favorite quotes that you just said right then, and you go right back into it, is supposedly Einstein said, "Anybody can make things more complicated. It takes a genius to make things more simple."
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of it goes down to. Is just help each other.
Mm-hmm.
With family, like I don't like doing some of the things I have to do for my parents or my wife's family or her at times, but I do it because I love them. It's just that simple.
Yeah.
And then you just move on with it.
Yeah.
There's not much more to it in some
Yeah.
sense.
It is pretty simple. It's
Yeah.
like be supportive
And love them.
of each other.
Like,
Yeah.
literally, it's just love. Do everything out
Yeah.
of love, even if you don't want to. And then you just move on. Like, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Like, it has gotten complicated for some reason, and I wish it wasn't.
Because people are overcomplicating it.
It seems
Yeah.
so. It's we're doing it to
Yeah.
ourselves for some reason, and I see it within my family at times with me and my wife, or me and my mom, or whoever it may be. But with relationships in general, it's just like, again, if you take care of somebody, allow them to take care of you.
People get in the comparing game too, though.
Yeah.
Like looking at other couples on Instagram or Facebook,
Yeah.
and like, hey, why can't we be happy like them? It's like, well, are they happy?
Yeah. If only
Like,
you knew. Yeah.
you know.
True.
Yeah.
It goes to the movie and like Hollywood, with movies, with books, romanticizing everything, social media. There's a lot that plays
I
into
love a good rom-com though.
He
My
does.
wife does all the time.
He does like a good rom-com.
So, something I've been thinking about that you were saying is kind of praising the whole Stoicism deal.
Okay.
Like you're talking about.
Like the previous generations, just
Yeah.
coming home from
But that's the
war
thing,
and
is
Yeah, and you
shutting
like-
up.
I don't even necessarily praise it. It's just the head nod,
You
and
feel
that's
like
all it is.
It's admirable. Like,
Yeah, and like
Yeah.
you don't have to make anything more of it.
Yeah.
And you just
I think that's
they focus on them, you focus on you, and when you are operating within that same space,
the
you
essence
appreciate the
of-
company, and you go. And so it's made the world smaller, social media and this everything else. And I don't want to rant too much on with it, but it's just you become worried about other people's problems or other people's successes. But when you really just focus on yourself and the people that are within arm's reach within this area, man, just being present.
Yeah.
That's
That's-
the essence of Stoicism, though, right? Like, it's the
It is.
quiet side of it, and that's what.
Man,
we-
I love going crazy. I don't have
Well-
to have control of my behaviors or balance at times. Like, it's just being in that moment and just fully loving it.
But that's what we talk about with Dead
Or
Reckoning too.
fully
Is
hating
like
it.
we talk about Dead Reckoning being, an idea, and not us,
Yeah.
not that. Like, obviously, it goes a little bit against that whole, come home and shut up mentality.
Yeah, that's what I guess I was getting into. Is like
It's hard.
how
I
do you
don't
how
know.
do you how do you
Oh, I
But-
struggle with it
Yeah.
all the time. Like,
Yeah.
what?
But I do. I think it's admirable. I think and I think it's intriguing that that guys and women came home and didn't talk about things that they experienced. Like we were talking about the Yankee Papa series.
With the pilot.
Yeah, and like the sequence of photos. So those photos were taken, and I don't know how long after they surfaced, were published, were put in a I can't actually. They had one of the magazines there.
I think it
that
was in
published
Time
in,
or Life. Yeah.
Yeah.
but it was quite a bit later,
Mhm.
and like, how long do you think it took that guy to process that experience? Because
Forever,
a lot of guys came home and they didn't talk about anything. Murray, the guy that I was talking about, that I went to that dinner with, he said he's never used any VA benefits. I think also because Canada has decent health care, and he had a job with insurance and stuff. But like the only VA service he ever used was a GI Bill to go to school, and once he got his degree, he started teaching. He never used anything else. He's never pursued anything. And I don't know about him, but I know, I've talked to a lot of guys, and they said like, there was nobody to talk to about it. And it was different too, where like World War I and World War II, I know a lot of those guys, it was like National Guard style units, especially in Canada. So like, I used to live in Barrie, Ontario, when I first moved to Canada after I got out of the military in 2013, and I think it's Cookstown. They have a memorial there to the sons of Cookstown, because all of the men from this community, like military-age males, left together, and so they, you were fighting like with your neighbors and stuff, and then you went home, right? you said you were from Arkansas originally. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like how many people in your unit were from Arkansas? I was from New Hampshire. Most people don't even know that's a state. Like, and I mean, that's the thing, is that then we go home and we might not have anybody for miles. We might not have anybody in constant contact. And like the physical contact is important too.
It's
Texting and calling and stuff is not like it doesn't do that in-person interaction
Right.
justice.
No, and you're absolutely right. I won't go on about that, but what that makes me all think of is we're talking about how back then it was so admirable, and that's just what they did. But that's just kind of what they did within everything. The emotions and the feelings, they kind of were kept internal. But my question almost in some sense is, do we focus too much on it? And that's what's also contributing to the problem, because it's like, what are we going to learn that we don't really already know within it? Like, I know we're always learning, we're always progressing, and the awareness is all great, but we've been in war since the beginning of time. All these lessons are out there. And the emotions and experiences have been felt and processed for centuries. Are we really that much better than them to be able to process into it? I know it's an individual journey to figure it out, but they were doing it almost quicker.
I think they're with that. Let's.
I wonder if we just sit on them too long. I don't know.
Absolutely. Think about we talked about the Canadians, World War II coming back, or any. We sent quite a few men over to World War II, if I understand the story correctly. When they came back, they ultimately finished. There was a ticker tape parade, and it was take that ass back to work. And they went on about their lives as though nothing had happened, ultimately, right? Many of them not talking about anything. Well, the Vietnam veterans got no ticker tape parade, came back, and quite a few of them talked about nothing. Yeah. My grandfather was in Vietnam. He's never told me really anything, and he's ultimately my father. My uncle was a paratrooper in the 173rd during Vietnam. Has said nothing. Where I'm going with this, though, is that we have, while I'm with you, I find that commendable, and that's ultimately how I've dealt with most things, is to compartmentalize them in an ultimately unhealthy way, and move on with my life. Again, ultimately unhealthy. But the fact of the matter is that they did the same thing, and what I think we realize through studies and research and trial and error, what have you, is that they still dealt with things, right? Like there was still an issue that was intrinsic to a combat veteran that we have now figured out, like, okay, these are your issues. They're stemming from this experience. Well, here's the way we can try and remedy some of those issues. So I'm kind of losing my train of thought as I throw this Hail Mary out there to try and sound intelligent. But I mean, I think, like by talking about them and discussing them, bringing them to the forefront, sure. But I also think we can overdo it.
That's what I'm saying.
I think 200% we can overdo it and almost saturate that market to where it becomes, you almost get the opposite end of it, where we're just talk to them. They're people. They quit acting so weird around them. Like, but at the same time, then you end up with people like, then you get way too much talking to you, right? You get them.
Tyler also always makes a good point that, like, and you said it in the divide, where, we don't offer the information and they're not asking, but it's also because we've created that climate.
Sure.
Both sides.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Are you referring to like civilian military divide?
The very first poem that's going to be read tomorrow when I introduce everything is
spoiler alert.
Is
this won't come out probably till Veterans Day on Monday or so.
It's the first poem that I wrote for. Well, it's not the first poem I wrote for, but it's the first poem in fact and memory of mine, and it's called The Divide, and it talks about the divide between the civilian and military divide.
Hey, before we end this, if y'all want to, you could read.
I can read it right now.
Poem or whatnot. Yeah, you want to read it?
Oh, I know it.
Yeah. Okay, but before you do that, I want to say something before I forget. Is I think it's really important that you pointed out, because all the things I was hearing you guys talk about, sort of with this Stoicism and everything, it does sort of come, I think, back to that divide, and that something that I've noticed is there's the sort of sayings, right? Like, oh, that guy doesn't talk about his war experience, so that somehow makes him like more legit, right?
Yeah.
Or his experience, he must have seen some shit or something like
right,
that.
right.
That seems to be like a civilian mindset that I've actually heard civilians say to me.
100%.
Like, hey, I know this veteran, he doesn't say anything, so he must have seen some shit. And I'm like, well, either he did, or he or she, or they don't have something like worth talking about. Also,
Or it's just weird bringing up.
Or
Yeah.
Like you could ask.
or they've tried to talk to people about it, try to share their experience with select people, and they couldn't bridge that gap. They couldn't find the commonality, and that's why they kind of shut up and like just, oh, hey, you know what? They're just not going to get it. Because I've been open with civilians about my experience, and I have met those people. They just don't get it.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't have a frame of reference.
And that's fine.
and,
Right.
and that's cool. But you know what? I've also found the civilians who do get it.
Mhm.
And I think that's where I've encouraged people to find civilian communities, like when you transition out, right? Like keep searching until you find civilians you can plug in with and open up with, right?
Yep.
They should be able to open up about their experiences with me, and that's how we feed each other in relationships, right? We support each other. And I've found that in the ranching community in Texas, they understand a lot about life and death.
Yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of those kind of,
The harsh realities.
yeah,
they've dealt with life.
harsh realities, yeah. And so those communities are out there. And so I kind of feel a need to, I guess, throw the idea out there like, hey, I think there's some great aspects to Stoicism. There is some times to like, I think another aspect of Stoicism is dealing with pain and other things in life with like grit, right? Like kind of bearing the burden of it and not letting it get the best of you, not committing suicide, like because you're dealing with chronic pain or something like that, you know? And so there's different aspects to Stoicism that I think there are some like really good aspects, but also like don't let not connecting with people over your experiences like be a reason for you to just shut up about them,
Absolutely.
and be willing to take a chance on people. If somebody doesn't get it, they don't get it. Like,
It's all right.
yeah.
You made a point at one point where you're saying, or right when you started that conversation, if people are saying that preconceived notion. Well, one of the things I've kind of noticed within this real big mental health awareness thing, and again, I'm not against it at all. It's incredibly important that we start talking about things and we dive into mental health. Being a medic myself, like health is my passion, both physical and mental. But what's almost kind of happened within this mental health movement, and I almost want to call it craze at times is people are self-diagnosing. We talked about it a little bit earlier, and people are also kind of diagnosing others before they meet them. And so that in itself is like, don't need to overanalyze things, and you're not an expert in a way. And even if you are, don't let it become a bias. Don't let it become a preconceived notion. Go into that conversation, that relationship, and be surprised. We don't know everything. And when you go into that, you're automatically either going to be kind of jaded, or in reality, you're just going to be influenced by what they say. People automatically hear veteran, and they're going to be like kind of standoffish, or they're going to glorify us. And anything we say, they take as the gospel. And they put us on that pedestal. And so just take it for what it is. You don't have to agree with people. You don't have to like people.
Yeah.
Or you can really like them, or you don't, And so that's kind of what I wanted to make my point above it, I guess.
I think one thing we probably should mention too, since this will be coming out on Veterans Day and we're not releasing the information until then, is we are going to be doing a volume 2 of In Love and War. I don't think I told you that earlier.
Well, the first one is called Volume 1.
Right.
I was just.
Well,
But
but
now
We
we're
usually don't
starting to
call
take-
something a volume 1
So
unless
because-
there's another volume.
because it's Leo's brainchild, we were kind of waiting
Yeah.
to hear from him to see if he wanted to move forward or if he was ready to move forward with the second one, and if he wanted us to do it. And we've all talked about it, and we've started finalizing everything for submissions for volume 2.
Awesome.
So we're really, really excited about it. So if anybody is listening and they want to take a whack at poetry, you really don't need anything besides a pen and paper, except for a computer, because
Okay.
you need to submit it online.
Is it for veterans only, or could this be,
It's
So-
pretty
or
veteran-centric.
y'all open it up?
No,
It's
the
probably
In
not.
Love and War will be veterans only. What we have started doing though is accepting submissions like on our social media from other people. So we have one lady right now who is a refugee, and she sent us some really cool poetry. So we encourage everyone to, if you feel like you don't have anyone to read your stuff and
Yeah.
tell you if it's any good or give you some kind of criticism on it, feel free to send it to us. We're by no means an authority, but we're people that read and write, so we can give some guidance to the best of our ability. But
Yeah.
We've also created writing prompts too,
Mhm.
and those
Dude.
and those we accept from
Yeah.
everybody.
yeah,
Oh yeah. So yeah, that's really good. I've been digging that. I did sketch timber.
Oh,
where we
yeah.
were like, just you have a prompt for each day, and I
Yeah.
find that's really good.
It's fun,
Like,
man.
It's good to have kind of like that table talk deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Just something to kind of a question to open up conversation, and then sometimes it's nice to have a little prompt.
yeah.
It is.
What so let's hit back to that poem. Let's hear that poem.
Yeah,
About
so
the
it's
divide, right?
Yep, it's called The Divide, and it's in fact a memory. It's my first one in it.
Do you want the book?
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, all right. Do you really want to get to know us? We're the kids that played in the middle of the street. From throwing eggs at houses to throwing grenades at houses. We towed the line and swore an oath. We towed the line and swore them off. Bent rules to keep a standard, with enough income to keep us hammered. And the action was relaxing, but the silence brought the violence, and the dirt, and the smoke, and the blood. And when we returned, everything was clean and became a routine. And echoes from broken records sound a lot like bitching, but y'all weren't there, and y'all would never understand, because y'all don't ask, and we don't explain. We're too distant for friendships, and too close for most. Uncomfortable conversations aren't meant for acquaintances.
Badass.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That one, again, it poured out, and took no time at all to write.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was actually, I think, the last poem I wrote before the book came out, and we were like, that's going first. I just thought, man, it's my favorite.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, man.
Did you have one you wanted to read?
I do, but my memory's terrible.
And
So
Tyler,
let's
have you
see.
been writing?
I do. None of them are present with me,
Yeah.
nor committed to memory, because my memory is also
Do you
trash.
do you write poetry?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Not as
He'll
much.
be sharing tomorrow.
Not as much. But yeah, I write poetry, mostly music. But yeah.
Yeah, I've again kind of along the lines of trying new things and creating new neural pathways. I started teaching myself guitar off like YouTube videos, and again back to the context deal. I had this electric guitar over here underneath there is I started playing that in high school, right? And I took a couple lessons, but my reasons for doing it was to be a lead rock star, right?
Yeah.
Just,
Make it big and famous.
front
rich,
man, just like
whipping your hair.
doing some guitar solos or whatever. And obviously I was doing it for the wrong reasons because I didn't like follow through with it, right? I did a couple lessons and I could play Smoke on the Water and ouch.
It's hard.
Let me tell you what you
And,
do in that situation. You pick up a bass and you go on tour.
Yeah.
Trust me when I tell you, it works. If you can play Smoke on the Water, you can play bass, at least in a hardcore band. Again,
and I
did it.
could play Outshine by Soundgarden. But now when I've like picked up the acoustic, my wife's acoustic guitar and just started like kind of opening up those old books again, just playing through it. But the reasons for me doing it now with this different context, completely different reasons, right? I'm trying to like heal my brain and like build new neural pathways, right? And it's just been such a different feel. Like it feels amazing. And yeah, I don't know. You toured a lot, right?
I did.
Yeah.
I did like probably three full U.S. tours, I think.
Are you still playing music?
No, I never played anything.
Yeah.
I
You're just like
I just hung out, man.
yeah. Just,
It was great.
Just mosh pit.
I was like a career mosher, and I sold merch, and I made sure everybody was where they needed to be and got paid. So I was like a tour manager, merch guy extraordinaire.
I'm pretty sure that's actually where I met him first. Before I met him in Italy. Like,
we don't know for sure.
Yeah, not certain, but there's a pretty good chance.
Y'all were
Yeah.
moshing
I met
out.
him on tour somewhere.
Y'all were punching each other in the face or something.
It's possible.
I had no
And I'm
idea.
not a punk rock guy at all.
Yeah. I wasn't growing up in Arkansas, but my first roommate in the military was from Long Island, and he introduced me to the hardcore scene. So I was stationed in D.C., and we'd go to shows in Baltimore and D.C. all the time, and flail around and throw punches and kicks. And
Man, that was actually part of what kind of inspired this whole thing. Before we like rebranded and focused.
I was
what
hoping
we were
somebody was
doing.
going to bring that up.
Is Ryan and I kind of wanted to like explore the human experience of people who like, and I've written about it before. I have another piece coming up where there's this phenomena that like, the punk rock mentality, the hardcore kid, like who is supposed to be like anti-authority, anti-establishment. There's a whole shit ton of them in the military, and that has never made sense to me. And I think it's like it's intriguing. Before Tyler really came on, Ryan and I recorded a podcast with Adam Patterson, who, if anybody is like really into hardcore, played drums for the Hope Conspiracy like years and years ago. And then when 9/11 happened, he enlisted in the Army. And there's a whole bunch of other people that we like. Who was it that was in?
I can't remember his name for the life of me.
dude was in Nirvana.
Yeah, the guy that was in Nirvana and
Yeah.
He's an SF
Soundgarden.
dude.
Mhm.
He was an SF guy. There's been a whole bunch of other people like, and you
You
can
meet 'em.
identify each other by like posture and style and
Tattoos.
Yeah, who's
common
wearing the
interests.
studded belt when they go on when they go out in town?
Usually,
Yeah, man.
it's the kid with the American traditional tattoos for whatever reason.
Yeah.
He has the least amount of tribal in the platoon. That kid's probably into hardcore.
Yeah,
Maybe wearing some skate shoes or something.
yeah, exactly.
The guy
like,
that's not wearing khaki shorts and flip flops
Yeah.
and
That's
like
my
polo, like Abercrombie and Fitch or something.
yeah, not Trent. Yeah, man, but yeah, that's a whole nother episode that we could do, but it's just, I think it's intriguing that like someone from that background pursues something of that nature, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's always a weird story. Like it's just the same way. It like baffles me how that happens, and at the same time, like I'm that person that I'm baffled by. Like I joined the Army on a whim 13 years ago, and like for some reason I just keep re-enlisting.
Yeah.
Even though I put in my 2-week notice 6 months in. But yeah, like that's always baffled me.
Well, it is kind of punk rock to join the military
Yeah.
in a sense nowadays.
Definitely makes your parents
Like-
piss off.
They were none too pleased.
During World War I, where everybody was doing it,
Yeah.
literally where they had to train with broomsticks, right?
Yeah.
Because they didn't have enough rifles. To like, what is the percentage of the American population that's joining the military now? Like,
Yeah.
There's
So I think there is an element of it that even though it is establishment, it is still sort of this like weird thing to do, right?
Yeah.
well, there's
Or
another layer to it where a lot of
different.
where a lot of people from the punk rock scene, they usually kind of have a pretty crazy background, or most of them are just crazy backgrounds. And so like there's that study of like special operators who
Yeah, they had like the same height,
The
same shoe size,
shoe size,
and came from broken homes or
broken
something
homes,
like that.
divorced families, and like that makes up a lot of the military population itself. And then I think there's just that enough overlap within the punk rock community and just kind of rebellious kids that just go in there. And because I think a lot of them, it's like the rebellious kids that like I guess kind of probably have like a head on their shoulders in some sense, where they know they need that kind of structure and that authority in some sense.
Wait a second. You went full establishment.
Yeah.
You went law enforcement.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, he became the man.
Yeah.
But and then
He became a professional
against it.
snitch.
I don't know, man.
You were just like
He was an MP.
He was a military police officer, a professional snitch.
You're a deep undercover for
Yeah.
the hardcore community.
Yeah.
He literally joined the biggest fraternity in the world and then chose the job of snitching on everyone else.
But I did
Keith,
really,
we need you to go.
He was the worst
really
MP
good.
I've ever seen in my life.
man.
Keith, we need you to go get inside the head of the police.
He was
They-
once
Report
told
back to us.
he was a greater threat to the installation than Al Qaeda. And that is a quote.
All of my peers were.
Were you not in that formation?
Well,
They were talking to you,
That guy got a DUI, so whatever.
but you had to ride a bike instead of a car in the middle of
I
a
didn't do any
Mediterranean
of it. I
summer.
kept walking like I always walked. I kept walking through you guys' barracks and just shooting the shit on shift.
Yeah, you're
And
right.
That's how I got the damn job done.
I met a Marine, a veteran, who joined the Marines as a punk rock life art piece. Like, literally joining the military was suggested by his professor in his art professor in college.
That's the weirdest of
He
flexes.
went to Iraq and got shot in the foot, and yeah, he's a very interesting dude. Very interesting dude. But he literally joined the military basically as like a I think his mentor was some chick she had like chained herself to a tree for like a week or something. You know, like was very
I've all
like
done
promoting of doing like extreme sort of life, long-term performance art pieces.
Jesus.
My whole career is a long-term performance art piece.
That's what you're gonna start telling yourself now.
Yeah, you're reaching.
This is literally a character I play every day in a uniform.
Yeah. Yeah. He told me that, and I was like, for some reason, I wasn't surprised, but at the same time, it's just like,
Oh,
wow.
I see it.
Like, you were in college, and like your art project was like, all right, I need to go to join the Marines. And, like,
That's
it's
dedication
like, wow,
to
that's
the art.
totally different reasons than why I joined. But
What career
cool.
what career field did he choose?
he was a grunt.
He was an 0311.
Even
Wow, he committed. He could have gone with.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you'll have water boys in the Marines. Like he could have done any number of things that wouldn't have gotten him shot in
Did
the
I not
foot.
just mention his mentor told him like she strapped herself to a tree? Like for
Yeah, did people shoot at
long
that
periods
tree?
of time? I don't know.
That's a bold move. I like it.
Yeah,
Oh.
he's trying to. I met him through the sailing stuff I do, and he wants to. He has this project along the 33rd parallel around the world where he's stopped at bars that fall in the 33rd degree. It's another one of his like long-term art pieces.
I love this man.
And he stops at breweries on the 33rd parallel all around the world and has bottles from him, and he's going to do something with
It's an
bottles
interesting dude.
from it.
That's a
But,
that's a really cool thing. That's
um,
way better.
So he wants me to sail with him across the Pacific on the 33rd parallel route, which is like, I think they call it like the suicide route or something. It's like there's like no wind.
I don't
takes-
see why you wouldn't.
It takes forever, and like, yeah.
Sounds like you got to do it though.
Yeah, I don't know. I got a lot going on. It's kind of like back to what we were talking about is like, maybe overcommitting yourself to some things. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much I want to do. I have to kind of reel myself in sometimes and focus. And
That support
is that
for
still an idea you're kicking around?
yeah, I'm very much. I very much support other people and what they're doing. I'm very quick to like get behind other people.
For sure.
And I've really had to recently kind of tighten things up and focus in on kind of what you're talking about earlier is getting some things to completion, right?
Yep.
And seeing some things through without getting distracted by a butterfly and going to help somebody else do their thing, right?
Ooh, pretty.
Oh yeah, Keith and I have talked about that multiple times.
They were terrible.
We want to help everybody, everything, you know.
Right,
Love and
yeah.
more. It was a big
We
one.
have some really good ideas. It's just a matter of like
Yeah.
Making it happen.
banging through the list of good ideas and like making, actually bringing them to fruition. Like, yeah. But, hey, man.
You want to read that poem?
I'm going to read I'm going to read.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to read one that, so Tyler and I wrote 3 poems together in the book, Fact and Memory. So
Cool.
this is the middle one. This is and. It's unkind times and unforgiving timelines, and it's knees that ache when it rains, and it's suicide hotlines, and it's bottles without bottoms. It's living paycheck to paycheck without praise, and it's the end of the month bank statements, and it's paying too much damn taxes, and it's playing keeping up with the Joneses. It's the shots of Jameson on the bar, and it's the ones standing in front of them, and it's the ones we raise those tiny glasses to, and it's tattoos of helmets atop rifles with boots. It's not enough hours in a day, and it's I'm too tired, and it's I'll get to that later, and it's my plans tomorrow that I had no say in. It's the dirt I want to stay on the safe side of, and it's the towns and cities I've been to but never more, and it's the highways, back roads, and billboards, and it's backyards where there was a life before. It's flying too close to the sun, and it's a fear of fire and burns and brimstone. And it's losing sleep, chasing dreams, and it's pulling over with a tank half full. It's choosing to reminisce instead of choosing to live. And it's the same phone calls and catching up on bullshit. And it's the same time between, and it's the times we shared, and it's the times we spent, and it's the time it took to figure out how we ever slept. It's pondering what could have been, and it's the balance on mercy's scale. And it's the things I've felt, and it's the hand I've dealt. And it's the hardships we've shared, and it's the moment of clarity that I can still feel something.
It's always been one of my favorites.
Yeah. We wrote 3. I think that was the best
I
of the
love
3.
that one.
Dope.
It-
That's awesome.
And like you were talking about earlier, it's just when you're working with somebody in that creative capacity, like that one, again, I think it was just in a day. And I was just, we were like, we want one called Fact, we want one called And, we want one called Memory. And that one, it was just us bitching. It was kind of the end state of it, and then, but still understanding the relevance of it. So,
Dude,
I'm glad you shared that one.
I never thought I'd be sitting here recording a podcast where I'm having like poetry readings on it, you know?
It's wild, man.
It's awesome.
It's wild.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's pretty fucking cool.
I think
We always contend that we have the best part of this whole thing has been the human experience and the contacts that we've made, and not for networking purposes, but it's just like, when would you and I have ever met?
Yeah.
Other than this, maybe, but probably not. Like, and we've, back to like attracting like minds and guys that don't necessarily have anything to do with this, guys that run like, shooting companies, like tactical instructors and stuff like. They say, "Oh, I've always written, but I never really thought of sharing anything." And they'll like we've had some of those guys do our prompts, and
kill it.
and absolutely just wreck it. Like, send us some really, really good writing that otherwise would have sat in one of their notebooks.
We talked about earlier how like social media or text messages or phone calls don't do it justice. Like being here in person is so much more rewarding. But
Yeah.
also on top of not only this business is like, again, Keith and I don't live anywhere close together, but we talk all the time now on phone calls, and our conversations aren't always just about business. Like he knows a lot about my personal life. I know a lot about his personal life. But within writing a book that I've been working on, and then this poetry or any of those things, it gives me a reason to reach out to important people in my past and a lot of my military friends, because if you don't really, unfortunately, if you don't have a reason, you kind of just get kind of self-consumed in your own life. And then the same thing with them. And I'm terrible about reaching out to people. I'm terrible about being on the phone with people. I'm terrible about calling back or replying back to text messages. But when I'm doing this, when I'm writing a story or a book or poems, it sparks an idea of somebody that was important in my life, and it gives me a reason to call them, and then you're just able to shoot the shit and reconnect. That's been my favorite part about any of this creative journey that I've been on recently.
Yeah. I find it to be really rewarding because, you know, life is crazy. There's so much going on in all our individual lives, and it's very easy to lose touch with people. And, I mean, just my family, I was really close with my family before the military. And then as soon as I started along that path, I hardly ever saw him, talk to him. And then once I got married, if I had any time to talk to anybody, it was my wife.
Yep.
Like, I wasn't talking to anybody else while I was deployed. And so I've been able to spend some time now rebuilding those relationships with family, and that's been good. But also just making it an actual effort to actually travel and go spend time with the guys I went to war with. And yeah, when I do think about them, when they cross my mind, calling them, right? And not having the expectation that we talk or anything, but maybe I'm just leaving them a message.
Yep.
Right. And it's been cool when you do the whole, like, hey, if I think about somebody, like reaching out to them deal. It's been really cool to see kind of that. Like, I've had feedback from people that's like, man, I really like needed that, and I just like left them a voicemail or something, like, hey, just calling, like, no need to call back, just checking on you, like, whatever, you know.
That, or they're like, man, I actually thought of you not too long ago too.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
and
we're all such important people in each other's lives.
I think meeting up in person though has been really helpful as far as pushing me to like continue on my way, and just like accountability, you know. Like you guys said, like sharing your personal life, and you know, I think there's like accountability right there, so you're not just kind of willy-nilly doing stuff on your own, because I think that's how we get lost sometimes. And like I just went out to North Carolina for my buddy's wedding. Actually, he's in the sketch over here with me, and a bunch of active duty MARSOC guys, and I went on a ruck run with one of my buddies, 6 mile ruck run.
Just for the fun of it.
Yeah. Well, he's doing it because it's his job.
Yeah.
And
my knees and back didn't hurt, so we
I
decided to do this thing.
I did it because I believe I'm a warrior, and I still need to be capable to strap on some weight and move.
Yeah.
And it was so awesome. Like nostalgia central, dude. I mean, we're on the Marine Corps base, running around. There's like Marine rifle ranges and like a bunch of Marines running around and everything. And I know you're in it and stuff, and you got like the Fort Bragg, what are the, you know, the brainwashing speakers that play airborne cadence
the entire time,
every morning. Yeah. But something about it just like was so uplifting to me. And like my legs going numb, and like all the issues I have are very apparent. But
they hurt again.
It's one of those things, like every once in a while it's good to strap on some weight in life and push through some pain or whatever to remind yourself, like to exercise that part of you, right, that is able to push through stuff. And just being with him and like being able to encourage him in his career, and like, you know, it's just it was really like meaningful. It was really meaningful time together. And we didn't even like, other than that, we were just, aside from like the wedding events, you know, like the rehearsal dinner or whatever, going to this and that, we just hung out at his house and just like spent time talking and chilling on the couch, you know, and working out together. And that was super rewarding, more than like having to have an activity to go do, you know?
Yeah, we just hung out at Tyler's house last night, and we all sat in the living room. Like, TV was on, but we weren't watching it. Like, we were just talking. Like, we hadn't, I hadn't seen them I saw Tyler, a year ago, 2 years ago?
Probably close to 2 years, yeah.
But I hadn't seen his wife since we were in Italy. So, like, and we were all just talking, and not even like reminiscing, but just like
Catching
talking
up.
about everything going on and,
Well,
things
and then
like
the TV
that.
was on, and it was The Office, and Keith and I are huge Office fans. So just making Office references too is just, it doesn't need to be, like you said, it doesn't need to be anything planned or extravagant, or I don't need to go show him every part of Flower Mound or Denton or Dallas. It's just enjoying each other's company.
Well, dude, I just realized we're over 3 hours.
Oh, yeah, I knew we've been going
Somebody
for a
will
while.
watch it. People complain sometimes
Yeah.
that, I wish that episode was, just part 1 of part 2, but
I don't care.
yeah, whatever.
When am I going to have you guys here
Yeah,
again?
exactly.
Yeah.
And
Well, we'll get to hang out tomorrow too, and yeah, it's been fun though.
I was thinking maybe I should read one from Fact and Memory. No.
In Love
not-
and War.
not-
You
not-
read
In
one?
Love and
Oh
War.
yeah, you definitely
Yeah.
should.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, we're really, really excited for Volume 2.
And we're excited for tomorrow for everybody coming out doing it.
Well, this is our we're talking to our past selves. This is future us.
No, we're excited for the 9th.
Yeah.
So you've heard from their book, Fact and Memory. This is In Love and War, the anthology of poet warriors. So just giving you some books to go out there and purchase, and I'll have you guys give all the information for that. Hey, do y'all have a website? Tell people where they can find you online and all that.
Yeah, so our website is deadreckoningco.com. And that's where you can find all our written content and our merchandise. And then on Instagram, we're Dead Reckoning CO. Twitter, I think we're DR_collective, but we don't really put anything on there anyways. So we're also on Facebook as just Dead Reckoning Collective. So check us out. We have a Facebook group too. If you want to share writing or anything in like a closed environment, then we can do that. But all the info for In Love and War Volume 2 will be on the website with pretty more strict than the first submission where Leo was getting like pictures of written
Handwritten
poems
yeah.
on napkins and stuff. So it'll be a little bit just to make it run a bit more smoothly with submissions this time. There will be like clear guidelines, so you won't be guessing about anything. But I encourage anybody, any veteran who has written poetry or wants to try writing poetry and have it published to submit for Volume 2 because it's a really cool thing to be a part of.
It is, and even though there's guidelines, there's still a lot of space for creativity. It's just to help the writer and ourselves keep it organized is all it really is.
Yeah. Because that was a big undertaking.
Yep.
I have a hard enough time just keeping my poem straight. But this one that I wrote for, I didn't write it for. It was one that I'd already written and submitted for In Love and War. Is called Breathe In, Breathe Out, and a lot of my poetry, I challenge myself to not write about the military. I like exploring like the human condition, the human species, and where we're at in time, and the technological disruption we're living in. And this Breathe In, Breathe Out.
Yeah, I knew a medic wrote it too. I knew, yeah.
Is I was actually in an airport and sitting there, and I do a lot of my poetry writing actually in the airport, I found. And while I'm flying, and so yeah, that's just kind of like the background behind this one. And it was just I do a lot of people watching, and a lot of people immersed in their phones and kind of not aware of their surroundings in the airport. And I like to do yoga and stretch out before I fly, before I sit for hours, which people look at you. If they look up from their phones and look at you like you're crazy. I'm like, yeah, I'm the crazy one that's stretching before I'm sitting for like several hours, you know. But anyways, it's called Breathe In, Breathe Out. Sit at ease while the people pass. Their smiles protect others from their depression. Breathe in, breathe out. A sea of people, tides coming and going, how each life has its waves. Breathe in, breathe out. Confused looks, looking this way and that. Follow your intuition, and you will never be lost. Breathe in, breathe out. I see your eyes. Smile. It's all okay. Walk tall and walk with pride. Breathe in. Breathe out. Let them look. They see you through sleepy eyes. Let them die. They have committed suicide. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out.
Hell yeah.
It's cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad you kind of gave that context too. That's cool.
Yeah. So, guys, I mean, I feel like I could still talk to you, but
Yeah,
luckily we'll
3 hours?
spend more time this weekend, and
Yeah.
you know, it's been a real pleasure to have you here in the new studio. We're gonna have to shut this podcast down, but I'll have you guys sign the table and sign the book, and
For sure.
dude, I'm excited for this
Very
event
excited.
tomorrow for sure.
It's gonna be one of many. That's for sure.
Awesome. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks for
Thank
having
you
us.
for having us, for real.